The last person anyone expected to save Harlow General Hospital was the nurse they'd spent 3 years ignoring. When armed men flooded the corridors at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, doctors dropped to the floor, security ran for the exits, and the hospital director locked himself in his office. But Mara Doss, the quiet ER nurse everyone called too cautious, too slow, too forgettable, didn't flinch. She grabbed a trauma kit, counted the shooters by the sound of their boots, and started moving patients before anyone else had finished screaming. Because Mara Doss had cleared buildings before. She'd done it in the dark, under fire, with nothing but a radio and a knife. Nobody at Harlow General knew that, and that was exactly why she was still alive. Before you go any further, if you've never subscribed to this channel, right now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like this one don't come along every week, and you do not want to be the person who misses the next one. Tap like if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me the city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's get into it. The ER at Harlow General ran on controlled chaos, and nobody understood that better than Mara Doss. She'd been on shift for 9 hours when the overhead lights in Bay 4 started flickering, which meant the backup generator for that wing was drawing more current than it should have been. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, without announcing it, filing it somewhere in the back of her mind alongside a dozen other small observations that nobody had asked her to make. The charge nurse, Denny Polk, was arguing with an orderly about a wheelchair that had gone missing from the 3rd floor. 2 residents were comparing notes near the supply closet. Dr. Garrett Oakes, the ER attending who'd made it clear on Mara's first week that he preferred his nurses to answer questions rather than ask them, was pacing near the admit desk and checking his phone every 40 seconds. It was 9:18 p.m. Mara finished her charting on a 62-year-old man with a proximal femur fracture, confirmed his pain scale hadn't changed in the last 20 minutes, and walked to the supply window to restock the trauma cart she'd depleted during the shift's first real emergency, a multi-car accident on Route 9 that had sent 4 people through their doors before dinner. She worked quietly. That was her default. At 34, she'd learned that being quiet in a place like Harlow General was not the same as being invisible, though most of the staff hadn't figured out the distinction. Doss. Denny Polk appeared at her shoulder. He was holding a clipboard and looking at it instead of her. Dr. Oakes wants the Medrano chart updated before handoff. Says you left the medication reconciliation incomplete. Mara didn't look up from the cart. I flagged it for pharmacy review. There's a discrepancy in his discharge meds from his last admission. Oakes would know that if he'd read the note I left at 4 o'clock. Denny lowered his voice. Just fix it the way he wants it fixed. I'm not going to fix a medication discrepancy the way someone wants it fixed, Denny. That's not how discrepancies work. He left. He always left when she said something he didn't have an answer for. Mara sealed the trauma cart, checked the defibrillator charge, and walked toward the physician workroom to pull up the Medrano chart herself. If she documented the discrepancy clearly enough, pharmacy would catch it before the morning pharmacist got in at 6. It wasn't her problem. It was just her patient, which in her mind made it exactly her problem. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard Dr. Oakes behind her. Doss, hold on. She turned. He was a tall man with the kind of permanent impatience that came from being told he was exceptional for so long that he'd started to believe inconvenience was someone else's fault. He was 51, had trained at a program that liked to remind people it was highly ranked, and treated the ER nursing staff the way some people treat weather, as background conditions to be worked around. The Medrano chart. He held his phone up like it was evidence. I saw your note. I don't need you second-guessing pharmacy protocols. Update the reconciliation and sign off. His discharge prescription from March had him on 10 milligrams of lisinopril. The current order says 20. No documented dosage change. That's not me second-guessing anything. That's a gap. Pharmacy will catch it. Pharmacy might catch it. That's different. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. That particular tightening she'd learned to recognize in people who were accustomed to compliance and had just encountered the absence of it. You've been here, what, 3 years? 2.5? Then you understand that this department runs because people don't freelance their judgment. Charted as ordered. I'll deal with pharmacy in the morning. And if he gets discharged before morning? Mara. He said her name the way people say the name of someone who is exhausting them. You're a nurse, a good one, probably, but this isn't your call. She held eye contact for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable, then nodded once and walked away. Not because he was right, because there were other ways to handle it, and she'd already decided on one. She pulled up the chart, added a secondary note flagging the discrepancy with the exact page reference from the March records, sent a direct message to the on-call pharmacist with the specific concern detailed, and signed off on her portion of the reconciliation. It took 7 minutes. She did it without telling anyone what she'd done. That was, in many ways, the story of Mara Doss at Harlow General. The hospital sat on the southern edge of Dunlap City, a mid-sized river town that had grown faster than its infrastructure in the last decade and now had the particular quality of places that were almost but not quite enough. Almost enough hospital beds, almost enough staff, almost enough funding to do the things administrators kept promising in quarterly reports. Harlow General had 340 beds, a Level 2 trauma designation it had fought hard to earn and struggled to maintain, and a reputation in the surrounding counties as the place you went when you couldn't make it to the city. Mara had taken the position here because it was available and because she'd needed very badly to be somewhere that didn't know her. She'd spent 4 years in the Army before that. Not in the way most people picture when they hear the word. She hadn't sat in a motor pool or processed paperwork in a forward operating base somewhere scenic. She'd been a 68W, a combat medic, attached to units that worked in places where the mission was classified, and the casualty rate was the kind of thing that got handled with paperwork and silence rather than press releases. She'd been good at it, good enough that she'd been selected for additional training, gone through programs that didn't have official names in any public document, and spent the final 18 months of her service doing work she still couldn't describe in detail to anyone who hadn't been there. She'd left because of something that had happened in a place she didn't say the name of out loud. Not to anyone. Civilian nursing had been the rational next step. The skills translated, more than people expected. The difference was that in the Army, when she made a call, people trusted her judgment fast because there wasn't time to do anything else. Here, people looked at her credentials, which said registered nurse, and assumed they already understood everything she knew. She didn't correct them. She just did her job. By 10 p.m., the ER had calmed into the particular quiet that preceded the later night rush. 3 patients in the waiting room, 2 in beds awaiting admission. The Mendrano situation had resolved itself when the on-call pharmacist called back, confirmed the discrepancy, and issued a corrected order. Nobody told Mara she'd been right. Nobody needed to. The patient was safe, and that was the end of the story. She was updating intake notes at the secondary nurse station when she noticed the security feed. Harlow General's nurse stations had small monitor panels that displayed feed from cameras in the public areas: lobby, ambulance bay, parking structure. Most of the nurses glanced at them occasionally, the way you glanced at a clock. Mara watched them the way she watched everything, which was differently. The camera covering the east parking structure had a blind spot near the stairwell access on level 2. She'd noticed it weeks ago and mentioned it to building security, who had logged the complaint and done nothing. Tonight, she noticed a vehicle, dark, panel-sided, no visible plates from this angle, that had been parked at the far end of the structure for 2 hours without movement. Long enough to be notable, not long enough to be certain. She watched it for another few minutes. Nothing. She went back to her notes. At 10:43, 2 men entered through the ambulance bay doors on foot. Not with a patient, just walking, moving with the particular unhurried purpose of people who had been in a building before and knew where they were going. They were dressed plainly. They wore nothing that identified them. They turned left at the first corridor junction and disappeared toward the west wing, which housed, among other things, the isolated recovery suite on the 3rd floor that had been occupied for the last 72 hours by a patient listed in the system simply as J. Harlow, a name so generic it was clearly not a name. Mara noted this. She noted it the way she noted the medication discrepancy. the flickering light in Bay 4, the vehicle in the parking structure. She filed it. She thought about it. Then she walked to the admit desk where Denny Polk was doing handoff prep with the incoming charge nurse, a woman named Sasha Oren, who Mara liked reasonably well, and said, "There were 2 men who came through the ambulance bay 10 minutes ago. No patient, no ID check, no escort. They went West Wing." Denny looked at her. "Visitors?" "At 10:45, through the ambulance bay." "Could be staff." "I didn't recognize them." Sasha frowned. "You want me to call security?" "I want someone to check the West Wing access log for the last hour." Denny set his clipboard down with a patience that was not quite patience. "Mara, it's been a long shift. You've already been in Oakes's face once tonight about the Mendrano thing. Can we not go looking for problems?" "I'm not looking for problems. You flagged a medication thing that pharmacy was going to catch anyway. It wasn't going to—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I'm just saying someone should verify. I'll mention it to security in the morning." Mara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and walked back to her station. She pulled up the access log herself. It was a system she'd been given credentials for in her second month, for tracking patient movement in and out of high-observation rooms. The West Wing third-floor recovery suite had logged 2 card access entries in the last 20 minutes. Neither entry matched any name currently credentialed for that suite's access level. She read that twice. Then she picked up the desk phone and called building security directly. The guard who answered was Tomas Ferreira, a decent man in his late 50s who ran the overnight desk, and whom she trusted because he paid attention and didn't argue for the sake of it. She explained what she'd seen and what she'd found in the access log. He listened without interrupting. "That suite's got a restricted flag on it," he said. "I can see it from here. Hold on." She held. "Mara." His voice, when he came back, had changed. Not dramatically, just tighter. "The 2 entries you're seeing, they're not in my system on my end. Somebody logged them through a secondary credential that I don't have clearance to pull." "That doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't. I'm going to walk up there." "Tomas, don't go alone." A pause. "I'm calling Martinez first." "Call me when you've confirmed the suite is clear." She hung up and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Around her, the ER's quiet continued. A television in the waiting room showed the end of a local news broadcast. A family with a toddler who'd swallowed something small was being checked in at the front desk. The overhead lights hummed. Bay 4's lights flickered again. Mara's phone didn't ring. She gave it 6 minutes, which was longer than she wanted to wait, and then walked to the stairwell and climbed to the 3rd floor. Whoa. The West Wing's 3rd floor corridor was longer than the ER's, quieter, with the particular density of a hospital late at night, machines cycling through their rhythms, the faint beep of monitoring equipment behind closed doors, the fluorescent lights at 3/4 power. Mara walked to the junction near the recovery suite and stopped. The door to the suite was ajar, not open, just not closed. The heavy fire-rated door that required a card swipe to unlock was resting an inch off its frame, which meant someone had gone through it recently and hadn't let it close behind them, and either they were still inside or they hadn't cared about the sound. Mara's training made certain assessments automatic. She did them without deciding to. She noted no sounds from inside the suite that were inconsistent with what she'd expect. She noted no one else in the corridor. She noted Tomas Ferreira was not here, which meant something had happened to Tomas Ferreira. She did not go through the door. She took 3 steps back, pulled her phone, and called Tomas. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called the security desk. No answer. She was about to call Sasha Oren in the ER when the door to the suite opened from the inside and one of the 2 men she'd seen enter through the ambulance bay walked out into the corridor. He was not alarmed to see her. That was the thing she noticed first. He looked at her the way you looked at someone you'd already accounted for, which told her more than anything he could have said. "You should go back downstairs," he said. His voice was flat, not threatening, instructional. "I work here," Mara said. "I know. Go back downstairs." "Where's the security guard who came up here 15 minutes ago?" Something shifted in his expression. A very small recalculation. He's fine. He left. He didn't answer his phone. He left. A pause. This isn't something you're involved in. Go downstairs. Mara looked at him for a measured 3 seconds. He was big, had the kind of build that came from sustained conditioning rather than a gym, and was carrying himself with a specific kind of stillness that she'd seen before. He was professional. He was telling her to leave because involving her was inconvenient, not because he was afraid of her. She said, "Okay," and walked back toward the stairwell. She did not take the stairs. She went 12 feet past the stairwell door to the supply room she'd noted on her first week, because she'd made it her practice in every building she spent significant time in to know what was in every room that didn't require a specialist key. The supply room held linens, cleaning equipment, and, on the third shelf from the bottom, behind the spare IV stands, a maintenance panel for the wing's intercom system and an emergency phone hardwired to the hospital's internal operator. She picked up the emergency phone and pressed 0. "Operator, this is Mara Doss, ER nursing staff. I need you to connect me to hospital administration on call, and I need you to do it in the next 30 seconds. I also need you to generate a security alert for the third floor west wing. Don't ask me questions. Just do both of those things right now." A short pause. Then, "One moment." The hold music lasted 8 seconds before it cut to a voice Mara didn't recognize. Male, a little uncertain, the voice of someone who'd been woken up and was working out where he was. The on-call administrator, a man named, according to the extension list she'd memorized in month 2, Derek Pell. "This is Pell. Mr. Pell, I'm our nurse in your ER. There are 2 unauthorized individuals on your third floor west wing in or near the restricted recovery suite. Your security guard is not responding. I need you to initiate a lockdown protocol and contact local police." Silence. "Mr. Pell, how certain are you?" "Very." Another silence. Then, with the particular quality of a man deciding to trust someone he had no particular reason to trust. "I'll make the calls." Mara hung up. She stayed in the supply room. Not because she was hiding, because she was thinking, and thinking clearly required stillness. She ran through what she knew, what she didn't know, and what the most likely immediate threats were. The patient in the recovery suite, J. Harlow, the name that wasn't a name, was the center of it. Someone had wanted access to that patient badly enough to use forged credentials on a hospital security system, and the men she'd seen were not criminals in the ordinary sense. They were too deliberate, too quiet, too unbothered by her presence in a way that suggested they'd already handled every variable they'd anticipated. She was a variable they hadn't anticipated. The building's main power dropped at 11:04 p.m. Not a flicker, a full drop. 3 seconds of total darkness before the emergency generators kicked in and the corridors filled with red-tinged emergency lighting. From somewhere below her, she heard someone shout. Then, much closer, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door being forced. She moved. She came out of the stairwell on the second floor into controlled chaos. 3 nurses at the station near the central junction were on their phones or frozen in place, trying to understand what had just happened. A physician in scrubs was demanding someone explain the power situation. 2 patients in the hallway, ambulatory, confused, were looking around with the blank fear of people who didn't understand why the lights had changed color. Mara went to the nursing station. "Who's got eyes on the lobby?" One of the nurses, young, first or second year, she didn't know her name, pointed at a tablet showing the lobby camera feed. The lobby was occupied. Not by patients, by 4 men arranged near the entrances in a pattern that was not coincidental. "Lock the stairwells," Mara said. "All of them. Use the emergency override on the panel behind the station, the yellow handle. We're not supposed to. Do it now and get everyone who can walk into the interior corridor away from the windows." The nurse looked at her, really looked at her. Something in Mara's voice, not volume, not aggression, just the specific quality of someone who was not guessing, made the decision for her. She reached behind the station and pulled the yellow handle. The stairwell locks engaged with a heavy thunk that traveled through the floor. Mara picked up the station phone, got the operator again, and said 3 words. They're in the building. Downstairs, in the ER, Dr. Garrett Oakes was about to make the worst decision of the night. She could feel it the way she could feel weather. Not because she was psychic, but because she had spent years learning to read situations by the behavior of the people in them, and Oakes was exactly the type of man who, under pressure, would do something decisive and wrong. She was already moving toward the elevator when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. DOS. A male voice. Controlled, military precise, with the kind of fatigue that came from operating continuously rather than from lack of sleep. This is Commander Reeves, Naval Special Warfare. We have a team outside your building. I need to know your position and the status of the patient in Suite 3 West. Mara stopped walking. How do you have this number? She said. We pulled it from your personnel file 6 minutes ago when you triggered the security alert. You're the nurse who called this in? Yes. What did you see? 2 men through the ambulance bay at 10:43. Forged credentials in the access log. Security guard is unaccounted for. 4 men in the lobby on camera. Full power cut at 11:04. Stairwells are locked. She paused. The patient in 3 West. Is he military? A beat. He is. And the 2 men in that wing are not friendlies. I know, Mara said. I told your people that. Another beat, longer. What's your background, Doss? She watched the emergency lighting pulse red along the corridor wall. I'm a nurse, she said. She heard him exhale. Not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it. Something that sounded like a man revising an assumption in real time. We're breaching the east entrance in 4 minutes, he said. I need you to stay clear of 3 West and keep staff away from... The sound of breaking glass hit her from 1 floor below. Then shouting. Then, very clearly, the sound of Dr. Garrett Oakes' voice, carrying up the stairwell with the particular confidence of a man who had just decided to negotiate. Commander, Mara was already moving. You might want to make it 3. She was already moving toward the elevator when her phone buzzed. She took the east stairwell at a run, which she could do quietly because she'd learned a long time ago that running quietly was mostly about foot placement and breath control. And she'd had that drilled into her in conditions that made a darkened hospital corridor feel almost relaxed. 2 flights down. The sound of Oakes' voice was getting clearer. That particular register of a man who believed that speaking with authority was the same as having it. She hit the ER level and pushed through the fire door into a scene that had degraded faster than she'd expected. Oakes was standing in the center of the main corridor with his hands raised and his chin up, which was either a negotiating posture or a surrendering posture, and from where she stood it wasn't immediately clear which he thought it was. In front of him, one of the men from the lobby, shorter than the others, wearing a gray jacket that didn't fit right across the left shoulder, which meant something under it, was speaking in a low, flat voice that she couldn't fully hear from this distance. Behind Oakes, 3 nurses were pressed against the wall near the supply alcove. One of them was Sasha Oren, who was holding a phone behind her back and either recording or texting, and whose expression when she saw Mara was the exact expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific person to arrive. Mara read the room in approximately 4 seconds. 1 man visible, which meant at least 1 more she couldn't see. Oakes was doing the thing she'd predicted, talking, offering himself as the authority figure, trying to create a negotiation where the other side wasn't interested in one. The man in the gray jacket had positioned himself with his back to the trauma bay wall, which gave him a sight line to both corridor junctions. He wasn't an amateur. She also noted that the trauma bay's secondary entrance, a service door used for equipment transfer that most staff treated as a permanent fixture rather than an actual door, was directly behind the nurses pressed against the wall, and that it opened outward into the ambulance bay. She caught Sasha's eye, held up 2 fingers, then pointed at the service door. Sasha blinked, looked at the door, looked back. Mara did it again. 2 fingers, then the door, and added a small, deliberate nod. Sasha glanced at the 2 nurses beside her. Very slightly, barely perceptibly, she began moving her weight toward the service door. Mara stepped into the corridor. Dr. Oakes, she kept her voice even. They need you in Bay 3. Everyone looked at her. Oakes' expression went through surprise, irritation, and relief in about a second and a half. The man in the gray jacket's eyes moved to her and did something she recognized as assessment. Quick, practiced, landing on conclusions. The ER's closed, he said. Not to Oakes, to her. I know, Mara said. I'm the one who locked the stairwells. She let that sit for exactly a beat. Bay 3 has a patient on a vent who needs manual management if we lose power again. That's Dr. Oakes's patient. She looked at Oakes directly. Bay 3, now. Oakes started to say something. She could see it forming, some version of, I'm handling this. But she held his gaze with the specific expression she'd learned to use on people who needed to be told what to do without being told they were being told what to do. And after a half second, he turned and walked toward Bay 3. The man in the gray jacket watched him go, then looked back at Mara. You should be behind that wall with the others, he said. I'm going to check on my patient, Mara said, and walked toward the bay. She didn't look back because looking back was what people did when they were uncertain, and she wasn't uncertain. She was calculating. She had bought Sasha approximately 45 seconds, maybe a minute, and whether Sasha had understood her signal or not, Mara needed to know where the second man was before anything else happened. She went into Bay 3, which held a 71-year-old man named Warren Gill, who was not on a ventilator and who looked at her with some surprise when she appeared at his bedside. Everything okay? He asked. Mr. Gill, I need you to do something for me. I need you to lie very still and not make any noise for the next few minutes. Not because anything is wrong with you, just because I'm asking. He studied her. He was a retired contractor with a kidney stone and the particular equanimity of a man who'd worked in construction for 30 years and had recalibrated his baseline for chaos. That bad? He said. Could be worse, she said honestly. How are you with waiting? Done it my whole life. Good man. She moved to the bay's equipment shelf, took stock of what was there, and made 3 fast decisions. She pocketed a pair of trauma shears. She pulled a tourniquet and tucked it into her waistband at the back. And she took a laryngoscope handle, heavy, stainless steel, the kind with a detachable blade, and held it in her right hand with the blade folded against her forearm. It wasn't a weapon, except that it was. She stepped back toward the bay entrance and listened. From the main corridor, she could hear the man in the gray jacket talking, or rather she could hear the rhythm of it, 2 people now, which meant a second person had entered the ER floor from somewhere other than the stairwells, which told her the stairwell locks had been bypassed, or that there was an access point she hadn't accounted for. She ran through the building layout in her head. The maintenance corridor on the east side. She'd never confirmed whether it connected to the ER level or just ran to the basement. Now she knew. She needed to get to the security desk. The security desk was in the lobby, which was where the other men were. So that wasn't happening. But the ER had its own security terminal, a secondary panel near the ambulance bay intake, used for badge management and camera access. She'd used it exactly once in 2.5 years, to look up the camera coverage gap she'd found in the east parking structure. She needed to get there without going through the main corridor. Bay 3 had a shared wall with the intake area. The shared wall had a pass-through window for medication delivery that hadn't been used for its intended purpose in years because the pharmacy had moved to a cart system, and the pass-through had been locked and taped over and was currently functioning as a surface for someone's personal coffee mug and a dog-eared copy of a nursing journal from 8 months ago. Mara looked at the pass-through. It was roughly 20 inches by 20 inches. She thought about it for about 1 second. Mr. Gill, she said, don't let anyone move that coffee mug. He looked at the pass-through, looked at her. Said nothing, which she appreciated. She moved the coffee mug, peeled back the tape on the latch, and went through the pass-through in the way that was technically possible if you were someone who had, at various points in your past, been required to move through spaces that were not designed for human passage. It was not graceful. She caught her left shoulder on the frame and scraped the heel of her hand on the latch mechanism and came out the other side in the intake alcove with her elbow throbbing and her dignity entirely intact because she'd left dignity somewhere around mile 6 of a training run years ago and never gone back for it. The security terminal was 12 feet away. She got there, woke the screen with her badge, and pulled up the camera system. What she saw on the cameras took her about 15 seconds to process, And then she made herself process it again because the first pass had felt like too much, and second guessing was sometimes the difference between a good decision and a catastrophic one. There were 6 men total that she could account for. 2 in the ER corridor, 2 at the main lobby entrances. 1 she could see moving through the East Maintenance corridor, which confirmed that access point. And 1, this was the one that changed the geometry of everything, was already on the 3rd floor outside the recovery suite, and he was not alone. Tomas Ferreira was with him. Tomas was sitting against the wall with his hands zip-tied in front of him, and a cut across his hairline that had bled down the side of his face and dried there, which meant he'd been restrained for a while but was conscious and not in immediate medical danger. The patient in the recovery suite. J. Harlow. She still didn't have a name, a face, a reason, only the shape of the situation, which was that someone with enough resources to field 6 men and bypass a hospital security system wanted access to that room, and the Navy team outside the building was 4 minutes away, and she had no idea if 4 minutes was going to be enough. Her phone buzzed. "Commander Reeves." "Where are you?" he said. "ER intake. I've got camera access. 6 hostiles. 2 in my floor, 2 in the lobby, 1 in the East Maintenance corridor, 1 on 3 West with your man and my security guard." A pause in which she could hear background noise on his end. Vehicles, radio chatter, the specific controlled energy of a team preparing to move. "Can you see the patient in the suite?" "Camera doesn't cover inside the room. Door was ajar when I was up there. It's closed now." "Status of hospital staff?" "ER nursing staff. 4. Possibly moved to ambulance bay via service door. I can't confirm. ER attending is in bay 3 with a patient. 2nd floor staff initiated shelter protocols before the power cut. Pediatric wing is on the opposite side of the building. Should be clear." "You know your building well." "I work here." Another pause. Different quality from the first one. "DOS. The patient in 3 West. His name is Harlow." "That part's accurate. Lieutenant Commander James Harlow. He's been undercover for 11 months. The people in your building tonight are the people he was investigating." Mara absorbed this. "So they're not here to extract him?" "No." "How long has he been post-op?" 60 hours. 60 hours post-op, whatever the surgery had been, meant he was mobile but compromised. Pain management would be affecting his cognition. If there was a drainage system still in place, movement would be restricted. If the men on the 3rd floor knew any of that, and they might, they were counting on him being unable to resist or flee. "Commander," she said, "I need to know his surgical status." "What was the procedure?" A brief hesitation that she didn't have time to be annoyed about. "Exploratory laparotomy, shrapnel removal. He has a Jackson Pratt drain that should have been pulled at 48 hours, but the physician wanted another day of output monitoring." She ran the math. "He can walk. Slowly. He can't run, can't take a hit to the abdomen, and that drain is a liability if someone grabs him." "Understood. If your team goes in loud, whoever's in that room with him is going to make a decision in the first 3 seconds. That's not enough time. What are you suggesting?" Mara looked at the camera feed. The man on the 3rd floor had moved from the wall to the door of the suite. He was doing something at the panel, not the card reader, something lower, which meant he was working on the physical lock mechanism. "He's bypassing the electronic lock," she said. "You have maybe 6 minutes before he's in that room, not 4. "DOS, I can get to the 3rd floor through the south stairwell. It's not on the main lock grid. It's a fire egress stairwell with a manual bar. No badge required. If I can get to Harlow before that man gets through the door—" "You're a nurse." The words landed the way they always did. Not like an insult exactly, but like a door being closed in a specific face. She'd heard them from Oakes, from Denny, from the man in the gray jacket 40 minutes ago. She was accustomed to the shape of them. "Yes," she said, "I am. And I have a patient on the 3rd floor who is 60 hours post-op with an abdominal drain and compromised mobility, and if your team breaches from the east entrance, you're going to have approximately 3 seconds to cover 3 floors and reach a room that's being actively bypassed from the outside." "So," she waited. "Yes or no, Commander?" The background noise on his end changed, closer, tighter, like he'd moved away from the group. When he spoke again, his voice was different, not softer, more direct. "What's your actual background, Doss?" "I told you, I'm a nurse." Before that, she looked at the camera feed. The man at the third floor door had shifted his angle. 68W, she said. 4 years. The last 18 months were... The paperwork gets vague. A silence that had a specific texture to it. Recognition, recalibration, a decision being made. "If you can get to that room in under 4 minutes," he said, "go. I'll pull the team to the south side to cover your exit route. If you can move Harlow, move him. If you can't, lock the room from inside and we breach from the east." "Understood." "Doss." A beat. "Don't get killed in my guy's hospital room." "I wasn't planning on it," she said, and hung up. Matsam. The South Fire egress stairwell was accessed from a corridor she had to cross 30 feet of open ground to reach, which meant passing the secondary entrance to the ER main corridor, where the man in the gray jacket was still managing the floor. She took 45 seconds to watch his position on the camera. He was moving toward Bay 3, which meant Oaks had done something Oaks-like and required management, and used that window to move. She made the crossing in 9 seconds, kept low past the corridor junction, hit the fire egress door, and went up. 3 floors in a fire stairwell in nursing clogs was not the most elegant thing she'd ever done, but she'd done things significantly less elegant under significantly worse conditions, and she reached the 3rd floor with her breath elevated but controlled and her hands steady, which was the part that actually mattered. She came out of the stairwell into the 3rd floor south corridor, which ran parallel to the west wing but was separated from it by a junction and an additional fire door. She could see the junction from here, maybe 40 feet. The west wing corridor beyond it was in emergency lighting, red-tinged, and she could see the back of the man working on the suite door. He hadn't heard her. The stairwell door had a pneumatic closer that she'd caught before it could bang shut, and the soles of her clogs on linoleum were quiet if you walked correctly, which she did. Tomas was still against the wall to the right of the door. His eyes were open. When she appeared at the junction, she saw him register her. A small, controlled blink of recognition, nothing more. He didn't look at the man working on the door. He just looked at her, and she gave him the smallest possible nod, and his jaw set. She came down the corridor quiet and fast. The man at the door heard her when she was 8 feet away. She'd expected that, because he was professional enough to maintain peripheral awareness even while focused on the lock mechanism. He started to turn. She was already inside his reaction time. She caught his right arm before he could bring it across his body, used the laryngoscope handle at the base of his neck in the specific way that was not taught in nursing school, and hit hard enough that his legs buckled. He went down sideways, and she controlled the descent to keep the noise below the threshold of anyone hearing it from downstairs, which took both arms and a significant amount of her lower back and left her crouched on the floor for a moment, catching her breath. Not smooth, not clean. Her elbow was still aching from the pass-through window, and she'd hit her knee on the man's equipment belt on the way down, and her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, which was normal and not a problem as long as she didn't need fine motor precision in the next 30 seconds. She zip-tied him with the restraints she'd taken off his own belt. There were 2 sets, which was its own kind of commentary on what he'd planned for the people in this building, and then went to Tomas. "Can you walk?" she said, cutting his restraints with the trauma shears. "Yeah." He moved his hands, winced, flexed his fingers. "Yeah, I can walk." "Mara, there's a man inside that room." "I know." "How long has he been in there?" "Maybe 2 minutes. He went in right before whatever you just did." 2 minutes. She stood and put her hand on the suite door and listened. From inside, she could hear voices. 2 of them, which was unexpected and important. Harlow was conscious and talking, which meant he was either negotiating or stalling, and either way it meant he had enough cognition to know what was happening. She looked at Tomas. "I need you to go to the south stairwell and get down to the lobby level. Don't go into the lobby. There's a Navy team coming in on the south side. Find them. Tell them 1 hostile in the suite and 1 down in this corridor." "What are you going to do?" She put her badge to the card reader. The light went green. The door was still on electronic access, which meant the man had been working on a physical failsafe but hadn't gotten through the primary system. It clicked open. "I'm going to check on my patient," she said. Tomas looked at her for 1 second with an expression she didn't have time to analyze, then went for the stairwell. She pushed the door open. The suite was a 2-bed recovery room with the second bed empty and the first occupied by a man who looked like someone had assembled him from the parts of a person who'd been doing very difficult things for a long time. James Harlow was pale in the way of post-surgical patients, with the particular careful stillness of someone managing internal pain by keeping everything external controlled. He was maybe 40. Dark hair, the kind of face that had been worn smooth by weather and stress rather than age. His hospital gown was open at the back, and he'd clearly been trying to sit up when something had stopped him. What had stopped him was the man now standing between the 2 beds with a tablet in one hand and the clear intention, evident from his position and the equipment bag on the chair beside him, of not leaving this room without information he'd come for. He looked at Mara, then at the door, then back at Mara, doing the math on the fact that she had come through that door alone and that the person he'd left in the corridor was not visible behind her. "Where's Cade?" he said. "Cade's having a rest," Mara said. She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. She kept the laryngoscope handle at her side, angled down, not raised, because raising it told him what it was, and she'd rather he underestimated it. Harlow looked at her from the bed. His eyes were clear, which was a relief. Whatever pain management he was on, his cognition was intact. He said, with a voice that was measured in the way of someone saving oxygen, "Took you long enough." "Traffic," she said. The man between the beds had recalibrated. She could see it happening. The small shift of weight, the reassessment, the landing on a conclusion about her that was somewhere between correct and incorrect, which was exactly where she needed him. "You're the nurse," he said. Not a question. "The one who called in the security alert." "I called in 2 security alerts, actually. Wanted to be sure someone got the message." He set the tablet on the empty bed. His other hand moved toward the equipment bag. "Don't," Mara said. The word came out the way it had come out on 3 other occasions in her life, in 3 very different places. Flat, final, carrying the specific weight of someone who meant it without ornamentation. He stopped. From somewhere below them she heard it, the concussive thud of a breach charge on a reinforced door, followed immediately by the coordinated movement of boots on the floor below and then on the stairs, coming up fast and organized in the way that people moved when they had done this before and were good at it. The man heard it too. Something changed in his face. Not fear exactly, but the expression of someone whose window had just closed and who was deciding what to do about that. He looked at the equipment bag, looked at Harlow, looked at Mara. "Step aside," he said. "No," she said. "You don't know what you're doing." "I'm a nurse," she said. "I'm keeping my patient safe. That's all I'm doing." He moved toward the bag. She moved first. What happened in the next 12 seconds was not clean and was not smooth and left her with a split lip from an elbow she hadn't fully blocked, and a bruised forearm where she'd intercepted his reach for the bag, and him on the floor with his wrist bent at the angle that made further movement a question of how much pain he was willing to absorb. The door came open. 2 men in tactical gear swept the room with the controlled speed of professionals, called clear, and one of them, she'd find out later his name was Petty Officer Darnell Vaux, looked at her standing over a man on the floor with a laryngoscope in her hand and blood on her chin from the split lip, and said with genuine confusion, "Are you the nurse?" "Yes," Mara said. "We were told. The commander said—" He stopped. Looked at the man on the floor. Looked at Harlow in the bed, who appeared to find the entire situation marginally satisfying. He said to look for a nurse. "You found her," Harlow said from the bed, in the thin, careful voice of a man who was very tired and in significant pain and was choosing humor anyway. "Little late, Vaux." "Sir, we breached as fast as—" "She was already here." Harlow looked at Mara. "Who are you?" It was the question that had been waiting all night. She felt it settle over the room, Vaux still holding the tactical position near the door, the man on the floor not moving, the building below them coming alive with the sounds of a team that had taken control, radio calls overlapping, someone calling all clear on the ER level in a voice that echoed up the stairwell. She pressed the back of her hand to her lip, tasted copper. "Mara Doss," she said. "I'm the night shift ER nurse." "Before that," Harlow said. She looked at him. He had the eyes of someone who'd spent a long time reading situations and people, and he was reading her with an accuracy that was slightly uncomfortable. Before that, Reeves had asked the same thing. Before that. Before that was a sealed file and a medical discharge in a unit whose designation she hadn't spoken aloud in 2.5 years. Before that was a name that people in this particular world, tactical, operational, the kind of world Vaux and Reeves and this man in the hospital bed with the careful eyes inhabited, would recognize. Before that was the person she'd been in the place she didn't say the name of out loud. She was still deciding what to say when Commander Reeves came through the door. He was shorter than she'd imagined from his voice, compact, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the contained energy of a man who ran on efficiency. He took in the room in 2 seconds, reached the same conclusion she would have reached, and then his eyes landed on her and did something she hadn't expected. He went still. Not the professional stillness of assessment, something else. Something that looked, briefly, like recognition. "Doss," he said. "Commander?" He crossed the room in 4 steps and looked at her face, the split lip, the laryngoscope she was still holding, the man on the floor, the room she had apparently cleared before his team arrived. And then he said something that nobody in this hospital had said to her in 2.5 years. "Your clearance is still active," he said. "Did you know that?" She hadn't known that. "We've been looking for you," he said. "Not..." He shook his head slightly, reconsidering the sentence. "Not like that. Not hunting. We've been trying to reach you for 7 months. You're not easy to find when you don't want to be." Below them, in the ER, she heard Garrett Oakes's voice raised in the particular pitch of someone who was demanding explanations and not getting them. She heard Sasha Oren's voice, calmer, talking to someone. She heard the radio calls settling into the pattern of an operation wrapping up, threats contained, personnel accounted for, the specific lexicon of aftermath. 7 months, she said. "There's a program." He glanced at Harlow, who gave a small nod that meant he knew what was coming. "Medical tactical. Training military field medics to integrate with civilian systems for high-risk deployments. We needed someone who understood both sides, fluently, someone who could work in a hospital and in the field and not lose either capability." He paused. "We put out a quiet search. Your name kept coming up." "I left the Army," she said. "You left active duty. That's different." She held the laryngoscope handle, felt the weight of it, the ordinary clinical weight of a medical instrument that she'd just used in a way it wasn't designed for, in a room where she'd been told by every reasonable voice that she didn't belong. "I have patients downstairs," she said. "I know." He said it without impatience. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight." From the floor, the man she'd taken down made a sound that was either a groan of pain or an expression of opinion, and Vaux moved to manage him, and Harlow in the bed let out a slow breath and reached for the call button on his rail. Not urgently, just the careful movement of a man who had held very still for a long time and was beginning to understand that it was almost over. Almost. Mara's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Sasha Oren. She answered. "Mara." Sasha's voice was controlled, but barely. "I need you down here, right now." "What is it?" "It's Oakes." A pause. "He let someone in. Before the lockdown, he let someone in through the loading dock, said he was trying to de-escalate, said he was going to handle it. Mara..." Her voice dropped. "He knew them. One of the men. I saw it. They knew each other." The room was very quiet. Reeves was watching her. He'd heard enough of it. His expression had closed into something careful and flat. "Sasha," Mara said, "where is Oakes right now?" "He's in the loading dock, with the man. And there's..." A sound in the background that Mara couldn't immediately identify. Then Sasha said in a voice that had gone very small and very steady, "Mara, he's got the pharmacy override codes. I can see the screen from here. He's printing something." Mara was already moving toward the door. She went through the suite door at a run and hit the south stairwell without breaking stride, taking the steps 2 at a time with one hand on the rail, her split lip still bleeding slowly, and her bruised forearm already stiffening, and none of that mattering at all because Sasha had said pharmacy override codes, and those 3 words had restructured everything she thought she understood about tonight. Reeves came behind her. She heard him on the stairs, 2 steps back, keeping pace without being asked, which told her he'd already made a decision about her that she didn't have time to examine. Loading dock was basement level, accessed through a corridor that branched off the east wing below the ER. She knew the route. She knew it the way she knew the building. Not because she'd studied it, but because she'd walked every corridor in the first month and never stopped paying attention after that. The loading dock received pharmacy deliveries, equipment, dietary, linen. It had 2 large roll-up doors that could be raised from the inside, and a personnel exit that bypassed the main security checkpoint because it was designed for staff on delivery intake. A perfect access point. She was angry at herself for not having flagged it specifically. She came out of the stairwell into the basement corridor at 11:31 p.m. by the clock on the wall, which meant 53 minutes had passed since the power drop, which felt impossible and also exactly right. The basement smelled like floor wax and recycled air and the faint chemical undertone of a large building's mechanical infrastructure. Emergency lighting here was sparser, single fixtures every 20 feet, the spaces between them genuinely dark. She slowed at the corner before the loading dock access and listened. 2 voices. One of them was Garrett Oakes. The other was someone she didn't recognize, lower, more deliberate, with the particular cadence of a man issuing instructions he expected to be followed. She looked at Reeves. He had a sidearm, which she'd noted on the 3rd floor, and was noting again now. He made a motion with 2 fingers. She goes left, he goes right, standard split. And she almost told him that she knew what the motion meant, except that would have required explaining things she didn't have time to explain, so she just nodded and moved. She came around the left side of the loading dock entrance with the laryngoscope handle in her right hand and her left hand free, and what she saw organized itself into information faster than she could consciously process it. Garrett Oakes stood at the loading dock's internal workstation, the computer terminal used for delivery logging, with his back half turned and a sheet of paper in his hand. He was wearing his white coat, which struck her as an absurd detail, the way absurd details struck her in high-pressure moments, crisp and white and completely incongruous. Standing 3 feet from him was a man she didn't recognize, mid-50s, heavy build, dark jacket, with the specific kind of stillness that came not from training but from something colder, the stillness of a person who had done harmful things before and not been particularly troubled by them. Between them on the workstation screen, the hospital pharmacy database logged in under an administrative override with a patient medication record open. James Harlow's medication record. She understood in approximately 1 second what the paper in Oakes's hand was, what the man beside him wanted with it, and what it would mean if that paper left the building. The medication record would show not just what Harlow had been given post-surgery, but the diagnostic codes, the surgical notes cross-referenced in the pharmacy system, and, if someone knew what to look for, the admission identity behind the generic J. Harlow name. Every layer of operational cover Harlow had maintained for 11 months, collapsible into a single printout. "Oakes," she said. He spun. The paper moved toward his chest in an instinctive concealment gesture that confirmed everything. His face went through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, guilt, and then the particular reconstruction of a man who had decided, in the presence of his failure, to lean into it. "Mara." His voice came out controlled. Almost. "This doesn't concern you." "That's the 2nd time tonight someone's told me that." The man beside him had turned at her entrance and was measuring the room, her, the entrance behind her, the other entrance where Reeves had come through on the right side. He saw Reeves, saw the sidearm. The stillness in him didn't break, but it changed, the way ice changed when temperature shifted. Still solid, but with cracks forming. "Put the paper on the workstation," Reeves said. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. The man in the dark jacket looked at him for a long moment, doing math. Then he looked at Mara, then at Oakes. "Dr. Oakes," he said. 1 word of instruction compressed into 2. Oakes's jaw tightened. He looked at the paper in his hand. He looked at Mara with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, but not condescension, not impatience, but something more complicated, something that had fear in it, and also a kind of defiance that came from a person who had committed to a course of action and didn't know how to get off it. "I know what you think this looks like," he said. "I know what it looks like too," she said. "Put the paper down, Garrett." The use of his first name surprised him. She saw it. A small flinch, like he'd expected the professional distance to continue even here, even now. "You've spent 2.5 years questioning my decisions," he said. "My calls, my protocols. You've never once trusted that I knew what I was doing. This isn't about that. Isn't it?" His voice rose slightly. "Not a lot. Enough. You think I don't know why you came to a hospital like this one? Middle of nowhere, no reputation to speak of, staff that mostly leaves you alone? You're hiding, Mara, just like I was told you would be. And you've spent 2 years looking down at everyone here from your little position of secret superiority." It was an interesting speech. It was also the speech of a man who was stalling, and she recognized the stalling because she'd used it herself earlier tonight, which gave her a very specific estimate of how much longer he'd do it before the man beside him made a decision for him. "Who told you?" she said. He blinked. "About me. Who told you I was hiding? Who told you what to look for?" The man in the dark jacket moved, not toward her, sideways, toward the roll-up door mechanism on the wall. 3 steps, and he'd be at the manual release. Reeves said, "Don't." He stopped, but his hand was already on the mechanism. Mara made a decision that she made entirely on instinct, and that she would analyze later with some uncertainty about whether it had been correct. She stepped toward Oakes, not toward the man with his hand on the door mechanism, not toward Reeves, but directly toward Oakes, which nobody in the room expected, including Oakes. And she took the paper from his hand. He let her take it. That was the thing. She'd gambled on the possibility that the paper was something he'd been pressured into rather than something he wanted. And when she reached for it, his grip released with the specific quality of relief rather than resistance. She stepped back. The man at the door mechanism made a decision. He pulled the release. The roll-up door began to rise with a mechanical groan, and from outside, in the cold air of the loading dock's exterior access, 2 things happened simultaneously. Mara heard movement, multiple people, fast and coordinated, and then 3 members of Reeves's team came through the rising door before it was fully open, moving low and fast, and the man in the dark jacket had approximately 1 second to understand that the exit he'd just opened had never been the exit he thought it was. He was on the ground in 4 seconds. Mara counted. She looked at the paper in her hand, then at the pharmacy database still open on the screen. She closed the database window, ejected the administrator session, and folded the paper twice and handed it to Reeves, who took it with the precise grip of someone accepting a piece of evidence. Garrett Oakes stood in his white coat in the loading dock with its one working fluorescent light and its smell of cold concrete and exhaust from the exterior, and his face had gone the color of old paper. "I want a lawyer," he said, to no one in particular. "That's probably a good idea," Mara said. The next 40 minutes were the particular controlled aftermath that she'd been part of before, in very different contexts. The phase after the acute emergency when all the variables were still in motion, but the lethal ones had been removed, and what remained was the work of documenting and containing and accounting for things. She did it here the way she'd done it in other places, moving through tasks with the methodical focus of someone who understood that the period after a crisis was when second-order mistakes got made, and second-order mistakes in a hospital were their own kind of catastrophe. The 6 men were secured and handed off. Tomas Ferreira had a laceration that needed 3 sutures, which she put in herself at the nurse station on the 2nd floor while he sat very still and told her he was fine every 30 seconds, until she told him to stop talking because she needed to concentrate. The sutures were not her cleanest work. Her hands were still carrying the last tremors of the adrenaline cycle, and the angle was awkward, but they would hold, and they were adequately sterile, and that was what mattered. Warren Gill in Bay 3 had remained exactly where she'd left him, and had, apparently, guarded the coffee mug with complete seriousness. She checked his vitals, confirmed he was stable, and told him he could probably watch television now. He said he preferred the quiet, which she understood. The Mendrano chart discrepancy had been resolved hours ago, but she checked it anyway and confirmed that the corrected order was in place and the morning pharmacist had flagged it for physician review at discharge. It was the kind of thing she did by reflex, the way some people lock doors twice. She locked charts twice. At 12:47 a.m., she was at the secondary nurse station with a cup of coffee that she'd made from the break room's aging machine, and that tasted like it had been brewed sometime earlier in the week, and Sasha Oren sat down across from her and put her elbows on the desk. "You want to tell me what happened up there?" Sasha said. "Third floor?" "All of it. Any of it." Mara looked at her. Sasha was 38, had been a nurse for 12 years, and had the qualities she most respected in people. She asked what she actually wanted to know instead of asking something adjacent to it. "I got there in time," Mara said. "I know you did. I watched some of it on the security feed after they got the cameras back up. The two guys you put down were—" She paused. "You did that like you'd done it before." "I had a trauma shears and a laryngoscope handle, and they weren't expecting me." "Mara." She drank the coffee. It tasted terrible. "I was in the army a while back." "As what?" "Medic, more or less." Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does Oakes know that? Is that what he was talking about when he said you were hiding?" "Oakes knew something. I don't know how much." She set the cup down. "That's going to be a question for people above my pay grade." "He let that man into the building. On purpose?" "Yes." "Why?" Mara thought about what Oakes had said in the loading dock. Not the part about her, which she'd filed away to examine later, but the part she'd read in what he hadn't said. The particular desperation of a man who had made a deal with something that had grown past the boundaries of the deal. She'd seen it before. She didn't have all the specifics yet, but she knew the shape. "I think someone had something on him," she said, "or promised him something, or both. That's how it usually works." "That's a hell of a thing to do to your own hospital." "Yes," Mara said. "It is." Sasha was quiet again. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone who'd been turning a thought over for a while, "You could have gone somewhere else, after the army, big hospital, city system, somewhere with a trauma designation that actually fit your," she gestured vaguely, "skill set. This hospital has a kidney stone patient in Bay 3 who has been patient and pleasant all night despite everything. I think that's a reasonable skill set match." Sasha almost smiled. "Not quite." "I heard the Navy guy, commander whatever, he was asking about you." "Reeves." "He had the look of someone who'd been trying to find you." Mara said nothing. "Is that true?" She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "They have a program, medical tactical integration, training people who can work in both contexts, field and clinical." She paused. "They wanted someone who could do both without—" She stopped. "Without forgetting which one they were in," Sasha finished. Mara looked at her. "Something like that." "Are you going to go?" She didn't answer immediately, which was an answer of a kind. The question had been sitting at the back of her mind since Reeves had said it in the recovery suite, and she'd been putting it exactly there, at the back, in the category of things she'd deal with when this was finished, because she'd learned a long time ago that the period immediately after an acute event was the worst possible time to make decisions about anything that wasn't directly in front of you. "I have patience," she said. Sasha accepted this and stood and went back to the floor, which was one of the reasons Mara trusted her. Sit. At 2:15 a.m., the ER had returned to something approximating normal. 3 patients in beds, 1 being discharged. The overnight quiet that was either peaceful or ominous, depending on the hour and your disposition. 2 of Reeves's team members were still in the building, stationed near the stairwells, while the crime scene assessment on the 3rd floor was completed. They moved through the space with a professional inconspicuousness that most of the remaining staff had decided to ignore, which was probably the healthy response. Mara was charting at the primary nurse station when Reeves appeared. He sat down across from her, not at a desk, just in the waiting chair beside the station, the posture of someone who was not here to conduct an interview, but to have a conversation, which she noted. He looked tired. The contained energy from earlier had settled into something quieter, the particular state of a person who had been running hard and was now managing the deceleration. "Harlow's stable," he said. "We're moving him in the morning when we can do it cleanly. His drain should come out before transfer. If you're moving him via air, the altitude and pressure change is going to affect." "I'll tell the surgical team." He said it without impatience, like information was information regardless of where it came from, which she found genuinely refreshing. "The man on the third floor, the one you took down in the corridor, his name is Duval. He's contracted. 3 other incidents in the last year, all of them involving people in Harlow's investigation network." "What is the investigation?" "Supply chain. Medical supply chain. Controlled substances, primarily, routed through civilian hospital systems to distribution networks abroad." Harlow spent 11 months building the evidentiary chain. Tonight was, they wanted to know who he'd talked to, who else in the network had been turned. She thought about the pharmacy database, the printout Oakes had been holding. So Oakes was part of the supply chain. The loading dock is how it comes in. Someone with pharmacy override access is how it goes out. We'd flagged Harlow General 8 months ago as a potential node. We didn't have a name inside the hospital yet. "You have one now." "We do." He looked at her with the careful directness she'd come to associate with him in the last few hours. "The people Oakes was working with, they knew about you, or suspected, that you were former service, that you were here under the radar. Oakes knew it too, or had been told enough to use it as leverage." "What leverage?" "To keep you off balance, to make you feel like the issue was your judgment, your authority, the way you handled yourself on the floor. If you're focused on proving you belong here, you're less likely to look at what he's doing." A pause. "It's an old play." She thought about 2.5 years of charts reviewed, medication flags, concerns raised and dismissed. She thought about every time Oakes had made the dismissal feel like her problem. She was angry, not the hot, immediate anger of the loading dock, but the slower, colder kind that set in when you understood the mechanism of something and realized how long it had been running. "How long?" she said. "Oakes? We think 14 months. 14 months. She'd been here for 30. She'd been raising flags for most of that time, and he'd been deflecting them, and some of what he'd deflected had been the ordinary competence friction of a hierarchical system, and some of it had been something else, and she hadn't known the difference. That bothered her more than the rest of it. "There's something else," Reeves said. His tone shifted slightly, not toward difficulty, but toward precision, the way people spoke when they were about to say something they decided to be direct about rather than ease into. "2 of the men we took down tonight, the ones from the lobby, they had IDs on them that were clean enough to pass a fast check, the kind of documentation you get from an organization with real resources. This isn't a small operation, Mara. The people Harlow was investigating have infrastructure in 4 states. What happened tonight wasn't just about Harlow. When they got word that someone in this building had called in a security alert and started locking down access points, when they realized the hospital wasn't going to fold fast, they escalated." He paused. "You were a variable they didn't have a file on. That made you more dangerous than 6 of my people." She looked at him. "I was a nurse with a laryngoscope. You were someone who acted before anyone told you to, in the right direction, with the right read on the situation." He leaned forward slightly. "My team is good. They're very good. But we had assets in this building tonight that we would have lost if we'd had to breach without someone on the inside who understood the building and the patients and the threat simultaneously." He let that sit for a moment. "The program I mentioned, the medical tactical integration, it's not a training program, not primarily. It's operational. Small, specific, running under civilian cover. Medically credentialed operators who can function in high-risk hospital environments, trauma zones, compromised facilities, situations where the clinical and the tactical are inseparable." She was quiet. "We've been building it for 2 years. We have 3 people currently. We need more. We need people who've already done both, who know the inside of an OR and the inside of a situation like tonight. People who don't have to choose between being one thing or the other." His voice hadn't changed, but there was something underneath it, the specific weight of a person who was asking for something real, not pitching something. "I'm not asking you to stop being a nurse. I'm telling you that what you are all of it, both sides, is exactly what we're trying to build. In the corridor outside the station, she heard two of her remaining patients' monitors cycling through their rhythms. She heard the night shift orderly doing the 2 a.m. rounds, the quiet squeak of the supply cart wheels. Warren Gill in Bay 3 was probably asleep, the coffee mug still on the pass-through shelf. She heard all of it the way she heard everything. Catalogued, assessed, present. "I need to finish my shift," she said. He nodded once and stood. "I'll be here in the morning. We need statements from you for the federal record, and I want you in the room when we interview Oakes." He paused at the edge of the station. "One more thing. The man you took down in the corridor? Duval. He had a burner phone on him. We pulled the call log. 12 calls in the last 2 weeks, 3 of them in the last 6 hours. All to the same number." He met her eyes. "The number is registered to a shell corporation that traces back to the same supply chain Harlow was investigating. But the billing address, the physical location where the account was opened." He stopped. Something in his expression told her she wasn't going to like the next sentence. "It's in this building," he said. She went still. "Not a room we've searched yet. We flagged it an hour ago, but I wanted to confirm the trace before we moved." He held her gaze. "It's coming back to an office on the administrative floor, room 412. He paused. "Registered to the hospital's director of facilities management, a man named—" His radio crackled. One of his team members, clipped and urgent. "Commander, we've got a problem on 4. They both moved at the same time. The elevator was across the ER, and she hit the call button while Reeves was already on his radio, pulling information, and the information was coming back in fragments that she was assembling in real time. 4th floor, administrative wing. A room that shouldn't have anyone in it at 2:20 a.m., movement on the camera feed, the specific kind of problem that his team member had said, with the inflection that meant this was not a loose end, this was something alive and moving. The elevator opened. They got in. Reeves said into his radio, "Do not engage until I'm on the floor. Hold position." Static. Then, "Commander, he's not alone." The elevator began to rise. "How many?" Reeves said. A pause that was too long for what it preceded. "2 men we don't recognize, and—" Another pause. "Sir, one of them is carrying a patient chart. Harlow's patient chart. The physical one, from the 3rd floor." Mara looked at Reeves. The physical chart. Not a copy, not a printout. The original admission documentation, which would have the intake photos. The fingerprint verification done at admission for high-security patients. The facial identification record. Everything the pharmacy database hadn't had. Everything Duval's team had come for tonight and hadn't gotten through the database and had now apparently gotten some other way. The elevator stopped at 4. The doors opened onto a corridor that was dark except for emergency lighting, and at the far end, through the glass panel of the administrative wing door, she could see a light moving. The beam of a flashlight, directional, searching. Reeves stepped out first. She was beside him. "Commander." His team member materialized from the shadow beside the elevator bank. A young woman, petty officer something, Mara hadn't caught her name, who had the specific expression of someone managing controlled alarm. "The 2 unknowns. We ran them against Duval's network. We're getting a partial match on one of them." "Who?" "He's not in the operator tier. He's logistics. Based here, Dunlap City. He knows this building, sir. Knows the system layout, the camera positions." She hesitated. "We think he's been in here before, multiple times." Mara looked down the corridor at the moving light. Thought about camera positions, about the gap in the east parking structure she'd flagged weeks ago, about the maintenance corridor that had bypassed her stairwell locks, about every structural vulnerability she'd identified in this building over 2.5 years that had been filed in her memory and nowhere else because nobody had asked for it. "I know where they're going," she said. Reeves looked at her. "There's a secondary exit from the administrative wing. It was added in the last renovation. Staff access. Goes directly to the parking structure. It's not on the main security map because it was added after the last map update and nobody filed the amendment." She looked at him. "It exits on level 2 of the east structure, near the stairwell, near the camera gap." Reeves had his radio up. "Team 2, east parking structure, level 2 stairwell access. Now!" He started moving down the corridor. She moved with him, and she was thinking about the chart, the physical chart. who had access to it, how it had left the third-floor suite without his team noticing, which meant someone on the inside had moved it in the window between the breach and the accounting of the suite's contents, and that meant she stopped. Reeves was 3 steps ahead of her before he realized she'd stopped. "Doss, the chart left the suite before your team got there," she said. "Before I got there. The man I found in the room, he was looking for information in the pharmacy database. He didn't have the chart." "It was there at shift start," Reeves said. "We had a team member verify." "What time?" 2200. 43 minutes before the men came through the ambulance bay. She looked at him. "Someone moved that chart between 10 p.m. and the breach. Someone with access to the 3rd floor who isn't in your network. Not Oakes. He was on the ER floor all evening. I can account for that." She ran back through the personnel she'd observed tonight, the movements, the positions, the people who had been where she'd expect them, and the people who hadn't. "There's a physician on the 3rd floor, overnight coverage for the recovery suite. He's not your team's patient's primary. He's the covering physician, rotation basis. I've seen him twice this week. Name: Braddock, Louis Braddock. He signed for the suite's pharmacy requisition on Tuesday." She paused. "He's not here tonight. He called out sick this afternoon. I saw it on the schedule change." Reeves was already on the radio. From the far end of the administrative corridor, through the glass panel door, the flashlight beam had stopped moving. In the specific stillness that followed, she heard the administrative wing's secondary exit opening. The faint alarm tone that sounded when a fire exit was breached. 3 beeps and silence. The tone that most people in a building at 2 a.m. would attribute to a system glitch. She didn't attribute it to a system glitch. She was already running. Reeves called her name. She heard him behind her, heard him on the radio simultaneously, heard the Team 2 acknowledgement from the parking structure level, and she ran the length of the administrative corridor and hit the secondary exit and came out into the cold air of the parking structure's level 2 access and saw, 15 feet away, 2 men moving toward the stairwell. One of them carrying something tucked under his arm, flat and rectangular, the size and shape of a medical chart folder. They heard the door behind her. Both of them turned. The man with the chart looked at her, and she looked at him. And in the cold fluorescent half-light of the parking structure, she saw his face clearly enough to place it. Not from tonight, not from the ER, but from the administrative corridor earlier in the week, passing through, white coat, stethoscope, the unremarkable transit of a physician doing a covering shift. Louis Braddock had been in this building tonight. He hadn't called out sick, he'd called out visible. "The exit's covered," she said. She was breathing hard from the run, and her split lip had opened again, and she could taste it, and she was holding nothing. She'd left the laryngoscope on the 4th floor. And there were 2 of them, and one of her, and she said it anyway, because it was true, and because sometimes the truth was the fastest thing you could throw at a person. Braddock looked at the other man. The other man had 30 pounds on her, and the look of someone making a rapid decision about force versus flight, and she was reading the decision in real time and doing the math on the options she had in a parking structure with a concrete pillar 6 feet to her left and an equipment rack bolted to the wall on her right that held fire safety gear she had registered on her walk through this structure 3 weeks ago. The stairwell door on her left opened. 2 of Reeves's team came through it at speed, and then Reeves himself a step behind, and the man making the decision about force versus flight made a different decision very quickly. Braddock ran. Not toward the stairwell, not toward Mara, but toward the vehicle at the far end of the structure. Dark, panel-sided, no visible plates. The vehicle she had flagged on the security feed at 10 p.m., and that had been sitting here for 4 hours waiting. She ran after him because she was closer than Reeves's team, and she was already moving, and her body made the decision before her mind finished formulating the argument for caution. He was fast. She was faster. Not by much, and not because of anything extraordinary, but because she was running towards something instead of away from it, which made a specific difference in how the body committed to the movement. She caught him at the vehicle. He had the door handle. She hit him from the left side, not cleanly. Her shoulder took most of the impact, and the collision drove them both into the vehicle's panel, and the chart went onto the concrete. and she grabbed his right arm and used the 2-second window before he recovered his balance to get it behind his back, in the way that was technically a pain compliance hold and practically a prayer that it would hold long enough for Reeves's team to close the distance. It held for 7 seconds. Reeves's team covered the remaining distance in 6. She released when she felt them take him, and she stepped back and she stood in the parking structure at 2:24 a.m. with a bruised shoulder and a bleeding lip, and her chest heaving and her left hand pressed against the vehicle panel to hold herself upright while she caught her breath. Petty Officer Vaux picked up the chart from the concrete. He looked at the cover page, at the identification record, the intake photos, the 11 months of operational cover documented in the most irreplaceable physical format possible, and then he looked at Mara. "We almost missed this," he said. She was still breathing hard. "We would have missed this," he said more precisely. "If you hadn't—" "Log the chart," she said. "Make sure it goes back to the suite under your team's direct custody. No third-party handling." He nodded and did exactly that. Reeves was beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, which said something about her current state of alertness that she noted with mild professional concern. "You all right?" he said. "I will be," she said. He looked at Braddock being restrained against the vehicle, at the dark panel van with its missing plates, at the parking structure exit where the cold night air came in and the distant sound of a police siren was growing closer from the direction of the highway. "Oaks, Duval's Network, Braddock." He said the names with the flat precision of a man constructing a list. "There are going to be more. The supply chain doesn't end here." "I know. We need people inside systems like this one, people who know what a real medication discrepancy looks like, who can see the building the way you see it." He looked at her. "Who notice a camera gap in a parking structure 3 weeks before anyone else knows to look for one." She looked at the concrete floor, at the corner where Braddock had dropped the chart, at the tire marks on the level where the dark van had been parked for hours. The police sirens were closer now. Somewhere below them, in the ER, her patients were waiting for the night shift to keep moving. Warren Gill's pain management was due for a reassessment at 3 a.m. The Mendrano discharge was scheduled for 7. Tomas's sutures would need a wound check in the morning. She had a building full of people who needed exactly what she knew how to give them. She also had a parking structure and a recovered chart, and a man named Reeves who was telling her that the things she'd spent 2.5 years trying to leave behind might be the most useful thing about her. She straightened up, pressed the back of her wrist to her lip one more time. "I need to go back to my floor," she said. "I know." She started walking toward the stairwell door. Behind her, she heard Reeves on the radio again, the clipped exact language of a man managing the next phase of a very long operation. She pushed through the stairwell door. At the bottom of the stairs, on the ER level, a radio crackled from someone's forgotten walkie on the floor near the ambulance bay entrance. She picked it up because it was a trip hazard and because she was a nurse in her building and that was what she did. The voice coming through it was not Reeves's team. It was a voice she'd heard through walls and around corners tonight but hadn't heard directly, and it took her 2 full seconds to place it because she was tired and her lip hurt and her shoulder was going to be spectacular tomorrow. When she placed it, she stood very still. It was Oaks. Garrett Oaks, who had been in FBI custody in the loading dock the last time she'd seen him, who had asked for a lawyer with the defeated certainty of a man who understood that everything was over. The voice on the radio said 3 words before the transmission cut out. 3 words that restructured the situation the way the pharmacy database had restructured it upstairs, the way Braddock's name had restructured it in the administrative corridor, the way every piece of tonight had kept restructuring itself just when she thought she had the shape of it. 3 words. She doesn't know. She stood in the stairwell with the walkie in her hand and the 3 words sitting in her chest like something with weight. She doesn't know. The transmission had cut, static, then nothing. She turned the walkie oversight. It was a Harlow General security unit, standard issue, the kind that Tomas Ferreira's team carried, scratched from years of use and labeled on the back with a strip of white tape that read SEC-07 in black marker. Not a tactical radio, not something Reeves's team used, which meant the voice she'd heard had been transmitted on the hospital's internal security frequency, which meant whoever had said it had access to that frequency, which meant She went back up the stairwell at a controlled pace because running without a direction was how you made mistakes, and she needed 20 seconds to think before she did anything else. Oakes was in federal custody. She'd seen it. She'd watched two of Reeves's people take him toward the loading dock exit where an FBI field unit had been waiting because Reeves had made calls during the breach that she hadn't fully tracked, and one of them had been to a federal contact who'd arrived in two unmarked vehicles while she was on the third floor. She had not seen Oakes since the loading dock. She had assumed custody meant contained. Assumptions were the thing that got you. She came out on the ground floor and walked to the ER, where Sasha was at the primary station doing chart work with the specific focused calm of someone who had processed the evening's events and decided that doing her job was the appropriate response, which Mara found deeply correct. Sasha, where's the FBI unit that came in through the loading dock? Sasha looked up, read her expression. They moved to the administrative conference room on 1 about 40 minutes ago. Reeves's people are with them. I saw them walking Oakes through the corridor. Who else? What do you mean? Was anyone with Oakes besides federal agents and Reeves's team? Hospital staff? Administrators? Sasha thought. Paula Merrick was there. Hospital legal. Paula Merrick. The hospital's in-house legal counsel, a woman Mara had interacted with exactly 3 times, twice regarding patient privacy documentation, and once in a hallway passing through that had lasted approximately 4 seconds. She was competent, according to the hospital's reputation. She had been here for 6 years. She had an office on the 4th floor, room 411, next to room 412. Mara put the walkie on the desk. I need you to do something for me. Pull Paula Merrick's employment record, whatever you can access from nursing admin. Start date, any facility transfers, previous employment listed. I don't have HR access. You have the staff directory portal. It has basic employment history for credentialing. Use that. Sasha was already typing, not asking why, which was one of the reasons Mara trusted her above almost everyone else in this building. Give me 2 minutes. Mara picked up the desk phone and called Reeves's cell. He'd given her the number before they'd gone to the 4th floor, the kind of operational practicality that she'd been grateful for and not commented on. It rang twice. Das, where are you? Conference room 1A. FBI is processing Oakes. What happened? I found a security radio near the ambulance bay. Channel 7. Someone transmitted on it 3 minutes ago while Oakes was presumably in federal custody. The transmission was 3 words. She paused. She doesn't know. Silence on his end. The quality of it was specific, not confusion, not dismissal, but the particular silence of someone rearranging a picture. You think it came from the room, he said. I think it came from someone in the room, or near it. Someone who knows Oakes and wanted him to know that whatever he's worried about me knowing, I don't know it yet. She kept her voice level. Reeves, is Paula Merrick in that room? Another silence. Shorter. She arrived with hospital administration about an hour ago, said she was there for Oakes's welfare as hospital counsel. Get her out of the room. On what basis? Her office is next door to the room where Braddock's Shell Corporation registered its billing address. She's been at this hospital for 6 years. Braddock has done covering shifts here for 14 months. And whoever transmitted on that radio knew which frequency to use and that I was a relevant variable. She stopped. Let him process. I could be wrong. You haven't been wrong yet tonight. There's time. She heard him say something away from the phone. Low, directed at someone else. Then back to her. Give me 4 minutes. She hung up and looked at Sasha. Merrick started here 6 years ago, Sasha said, eyes on the screen. Transferred from a regional hospital group called Caldwell Health Partners. They operated 4 facilities in 2 states before... She stopped. Read something. Before a federal investigation shut them down 5 years ago. Supply chain fraud. Medical equipment. She looked up. The case was dropped. Insufficient evidence. The supply chain didn't end here. Reeves had said it in the parking structure. He'd meant it as a warning about the investigation's scope. She was beginning to understand he'd been more right than he knew. Print that, Mara said. Everything you can pull. She took the stairs to the first floor at a walk, making herself slow down because arriving at a federal interview situation out of breath and visibly agitated was not the condition she wanted to arrive in. She had the printed employment summary in her hand, 2 pages, Sasha's annotations in the margins, and she had the walkie in her left jacket pocket where she could feel its weight without displaying it. The administrative conference room was at the end of the first floor corridor, past the patient billing offices and the volunteer services desk that was dark and closed at this hour. Through the narrow window panel beside the conference room door, she could see the room's occupants, 2 FBI agents she didn't know, Reeves standing near the far wall, Oakes seated at the table with his hands visible and his white coat gone, and a woman at the table's edge who was in the process of standing. Paula Merrick. Late 40s, dark suit, the composed professional face of someone accustomed to high-tension rooms. She was holding a leather portfolio, and she was standing in the particular way of a person who had just been asked to leave and was deciding how to do it in a way that maintained her position. Mara pushed the conference room door open. Everyone looked at her. Oakes's expression cycled through several things before landing on something she read as a specific type of fear. Not of the situation, which he'd already accepted, but of her specifically, of what she might have come to say. Merrick looked at her with the professional neutrality of a woman who had spent years being the calmest person in difficult rooms. "Ms. Doss, this is a restricted—" "She doesn't know," Mara said. The room went very still. It was a gamble. She knew it was a gamble. She was saying the 3 words back into the space and watching where they landed. And what she was watching was Merrick. And what she saw in Merrick in the half-second before the professional mask reasserted itself was the specific flinch of a person who had heard something that they recognized and hadn't expected to hear from this direction. It lasted less than a second. Then Merrick said, calmly, "I don't know what that means." Someone transmitted those words on this hospital's internal security channel approximately 4 minutes ago, Channel 7. The transmission was brief and the signal came from somewhere on this floor. She held Merrick's gaze. "You're the only person in this room who had reason to send it. That's an extraordinary accusation." "Yes," Mara agreed. "It is." Reeves moved, not dramatically. A shift in position that put him closer to Merrick's side of the room in a way that closed the geometry of her exit options without making it theatrical. One of the FBI agents, a woman with a close-cropped haircut and the specific focused attention of someone who'd been watching the room carefully since the moment it changed, reached into her jacket for something. Merrick looked at Oakes. It was a brief look, a fractional second, but it was the look of 2 people who shared information that no one else in the room had, and it was the look that confirmed everything Mara had come in here holding. "I want independent legal counsel," Merrick said. "That's your right," the FBI agent said. Her voice was professionally neutral in the way of people who had been in this moment many times. "Please put the portfolio on the table." Merrick set it down. Reeves caught Mara's eye across the room. Something in his expression had shifted from the controlled urgency of the last 3 hours into something she'd seen occasionally in people who had been in difficult situations and had a specific response to watching them resolve. Not satisfaction exactly, but the recognition of a thing being correctly understood. She looked at Oakes. He was staring at the table's surface. He'd looked at her once since she'd entered, and that look had been the most honest expression she'd seen from him in 2.5 years. Not defiance, not the reconstructed authority of the loading dock, just the look of a man who had understood that the specific thing he'd gambled on had failed. That she had known. That she'd come in here because she knew. She didn't feel triumphant about it. She felt tired, and her shoulder hurt, and she was very aware that she had 2 patients in the ER who needed to have their morning charted properly. She put the employment summary on the table in front of the FBI agent. Sasha Oren at the ER nursing station pulled that from the staff credentialing portal 15 minutes ago. Merrick's transfer is from a hospital group that was investigated for supply chain fraud. The case didn't result in charges. She paused. Harlow's investigation might. The FBI agent took the paper, read it, set it flat. "Thank you, Ms. Doss." Mara nodded and left. The thing about Aftermath was that it didn't wait for you to be ready. It arrived at the pace of the bureaucratic and the institutional and the very human need to account for things. And it arrived while you were still in the state the preceding hours had left you in, which in her case was a split lip, a bruised shoulder, two compromised forearms of varying severity, and the particular cognitive flatness that settled after extended high alert operation. She went back to the ER and spent the next 90 minutes doing her job. She reassessed Warren Gill's pain management, determined he was adequately controlled, and documented accordingly. She checked the Mendrano chart and confirmed the corrected discharge order was in place. She did a circuit of the ER's active beds, noted that the young nurse who'd pulled the yellow emergency handle earlier in the night was doing her charting with the focused, slightly glassy expression of someone who had processed an extraordinary evening by deciding to do everything correctly, and told her she'd done well, which made the young nurse her name was Petra, Mara learned, stop and look at her with the expression of someone who hadn't expected that. "The stairwell locks," Petra said. "When you told me to pull the handle, how did you know it was the right call?" Mara considered the question. "It was the next correct step. The right call is usually just the next correct step." Petra nodded slowly, like she was filing that in a specific place. At 4 a.m., Reeves appeared in the ER with a paper cup of coffee that he'd gotten from somewhere. Not the break room machine, because whatever he was holding smelled like actual coffee, and sat down across from her at the secondary station with the particular posture of a man who had finished one phase of something and was beginning another. "Merrick's phone," he said. "We pulled it with her consent in exchange for a discussion with the U.S. attorney. 14 contacts in common with the distribution network Harlow mapped. 2 of them are the same shell corporations that funded tonight's operation." Mara absorbed this. "How long?" "We think she was the inside infrastructure from the beginning. When they were looking for a hospital to use as a distribution node, they needed someone who could manage the legal exposure. Someone who knew hospital operations, compliance systems, how to structure an access point that looked legitimate from the outside." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Oakes came in later, recruited through Merrick. The access he had, pharmacy override, ER protocols, loading dock management authority, he had all of it because she'd built the conditions for it." "He was the mechanism," Mara said. "She was the architecture." "Yes." "And Braddock?" "Covering physician was a perfect position for their purposes. He had legitimate medical credentials and rotating access to high observation patients. He didn't know about Harlow specifically until 2 weeks ago, when Merrick flagged the recovery suite admission as a potential intelligence asset." He set the cup down. "She'd been watching the suite since the admission. She'd identified the military connection before we understood the breach risk had escalated." Mara thought about the medication discrepancy, the lisinopril dosage, the small, specific thing she'd flagged and Oakes had dismissed. She thought about whether Oakes's dismissal had been the professional impatience she'd always attributed it to, or whether it had been something else. A man managing the floor's attention, keeping her focused on fighting institutional battles rather than looking at what was actually moving through the loading dock. "He was using the medication dismissals," she said, "not deliberately maybe, but the effect was the same. Every time he made my competence the issue, I was spending energy on that instead of watching the building." Reeves didn't confirm or deny this. He didn't need to. "The FBI is treating it as part of the operational cover. Whether Oakes's behavior toward you was coordinated or incidental, it served the same function." He paused. "That's going to be relevant in the federal case." "I'm not—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm not interested in it being relevant for my sake." "I know. It's relevant regardless." She looked at her hands on the desk. The scrape on her left palm from the pass-through window latch had crusted over. The bruising on her forearm was developing color. She'd treat it properly after the shift ended, which was technically in 45 minutes, though the concept of her shift ending felt somewhat abstract at this point. "Oakes talked," Reeves said, "in exchange for federal cooperation consideration. We have the full network map from his end. 14 months of supply chain routing, distribution contacts, financial structures." He picked up the coffee again. "Merrick tried the same. Her attorney advised cooperation. The U.S. Attorney's Office is reviewing both offers." "What about Braddock?" "He's being processed. He'll talk. They always talk when the network closes around them." He said it without satisfaction. Just the flat observation of someone who had watched this pattern enough times to have lost the emotional relationship with it. The physical chart is in federal evidence. Harlow's cover is intact. His contact network is intact. He looked at her. 11 months of work survived tonight because of a camera gap you flagged 3 weeks ago and a medication discrepancy you refused to let go. She didn't say anything to that. You're not going to respond to that, he observed. I was doing my job. You were doing 4 jobs simultaneously. He wasn't arguing with her. He was just being precise. That's worth saying out loud, even if you're not going to accept it. She picked up her own cup, the terrible break room coffee, now cold, and drank it anyway. What happens to the hospital? Harlow General? He considered. Federal investigation into the supply chain operation will require access to records going back 14 months. The loading dock will be part of the evidentiary scope. The pharmacy system, the override logs. He paused. The hospital's administration is going to be in a difficult position. The director of facilities management, whose name is on the room 412 Shell Corporation registration, we picked him up at his home at 3 this morning. He's cooperating. The name Reeves had started to tell her in the conference room on 1 before the radio had crackled. She'd never gotten the full sentence. Who is it? Man named Ferris, Thomas Ferris. He's been facilities director for 3 years. The Shell Corporation registration predates his hire here, which suggests he was placed. Someone identified this hospital as a viable node before the operation was built and installed the people needed to run it. She thought about that. About a building she'd walked into 2.5 years ago because it was available and she'd needed somewhere that didn't know her. About whether that was the full story of how she'd ended up here, or whether the full story was something she'd been one of the last people to understand. Reeves, she said. Yeah. The program you mentioned, the medical tactical integration. Is it real? Very. And my name came up in a quiet search. Yes. How quiet? He held her gaze. Federal database query, former service members with dual credential profiles, so medical and tactical. People who left active duty but retained clearances. People whose post-service positions overlapped with environments that had appeared in ongoing investigations. He set his cup down carefully. Harlow General appeared in our preliminary network mapping 8 months ago. Your name was in the staff directory. She was quiet for a long moment. You weren't put here, he said. That's not what I'm saying. You took this job because you needed it. That's a separate thing from the fact that once you were here, we noticed you. He seemed to understand that the distinction mattered to her, which it did, and which she hadn't said, which meant he was good at reading people. The search was passive. We ran names against positions. We didn't surveil you. We didn't create conditions for you. You were just here. And Oakes? Did you run him? We ran everyone. Oakes came back clean at that stage. The pharmacy anomalies that linked him to the operation were identified 6 months later through Harlow's fieldwork, and by then the case strategy was built around Harlow's cover rather than a direct approach. He paused. If we'd moved on Oakes 6 months ago, we'd have lost Merrick, the architecture. And Harlow would have been exposed earlier. Yes. She thought about 6 months of medication discrepancies, 6 months of Oakes making her feel like the problem. I filed 17 flags in 6 months, she said. Not with heat, just placing the number in the room. I know. I read your incident log 2 days ago. He said it without apology, which she respected more than apology would have been. Every flag was correct. The ER was very quiet. Petra was at the far end of the room doing inventory. The monitors cycled through their rhythms. Through the ambulance bay doors, which were operational again, the parking lot showed the first gray suggestion of a November dawn, that specific quality of light that wasn't quite light yet, but was the end of dark. 5:47 a.m. Her shift had technically ended 47 minutes ago. The debrief began at 7 a.m. in the administrative conference room that had, as of 6 hours ago, been a federal interview space and was now a federal debrief space, which smelled like cold coffee and the specific institutional anxiety of a building that had understood something about itself overnight. There were 9 people in the room: Reeves, 2 FBI agents she now knew by name, Special Agents Carla Dent and Marcus Tully, A woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office named Vera Okonkwo, who had the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had tried many cases and knew that patience in the early stages was how you won them. 2 members of Reeves's naval team, a representative from the hospital's parent health system who had driven 3 hours and looked like it, and Mara. She was still in her nursing scrubs. She'd washed her face and changed her shirt in the locker room and put surgical tape on the split lip, which would have to do. Her shoulder she'd wrapped with a crepe bandage from the trauma cart, which was not exactly clinical best practice for her own care, but was adequate. She sat at the table with a legal pad she didn't write on and a pen she held because having something in her hand helped her think. She gave her account from 9:18 p.m. to 5:47 a.m. She gave it in the order it had happened, without editorial, with the specific details she'd retained and the honest gaps where her recall was uncertain. She did not minimize what she'd done, and she did not amplify it. She answered Dent's questions, which were good questions, and she answered Okonkwo's questions, which were better ones, the kind of questions that were already building toward the prosecutorial framing of a case. At 8:45 a.m., Okonkwo said, "Ms. Doss, the medication flag you filed on the Mendrano chart, the lisinopril discrepancy. Dr. Oakes dismissed that concern verbally and instructed you to chart as ordered. You escalated through the pharmacist instead." "Yes." "That escalation pattern, going around the physician's dismissal to another clinical channel, was that common for you?" "Common enough that the pharmacy had a standing familiarity with my flags." Okonkwo made a note. "Oakes's pattern of dismissing your clinical concerns will be part of the prosecution's behavioral evidence. His attorneys are going to argue it was professional disagreement. We're going to argue it was operational suppression of internal oversight." She looked at Mara steadily. "I want to be clear about what that means. Your experience here, 2.5 years of being dismissed, overridden, made to feel like the problem, is going to be entered into the federal record as evidence of a deliberate pattern." Mara understood this. She'd understood it since the parking structure. "Okay," she said. "It also means you'll be deposed, possibly testify." "Okay?" Okonkwo studied her. "Most people, when they learn that the professional treatment they received was potentially engineered, have a stronger reaction than okay." "I'm processing it," Mara said. "I'll have a stronger reaction later." This produced a brief, genuine, almost smile from Okonkwo, which was probably not something that happened often in federal depositions. The debrief broke at 10 a.m. People moved toward the door in the way of people who had a very large amount of work ahead of them and were already mentally beginning it. Reeves stopped her in the corridor. "There's one more thing," he said. She waited. "Harlow's being transferred at noon. He asked to speak with you before the transport, specifically." He paused. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "I'll go." The third-floor recovery suite had been cleaned and reorganized. The evidence markers were gone. The evidence bag that had held the man she'd restrained in the corridor was gone, and the door was properly closed and functioning on its electronic lock. 2 naval personnel were stationed outside. They nodded at her when she badged through. Harlow was sitting up in the bed, which was better than he'd been at 2 a.m. His color was still poor, post-surgical pale layered with the specific gray of someone who'd been through an acute threat while physically compromised. But his eyes were clear and the pain management was evidently not interfering with his cognition. The Jackson Pratt drain had been removed, she noted. Someone had done that correctly. He looked at her when she came in. Looked at the surgical tape on her lip, the wrapped shoulder visible at the collar of her scrubs. "You look worse than I do," he said. "You're 60 hours post-op from a laparotomy. The bar is low." He made a sound that might have been a laugh under better circumstances. "Sit down, please." She sat in the chair beside the bed, the one that had held the evidence bag during the night's events, now just a chair again. "Reeves told me what you did," Harlow said. "The access log, the camera system, the man in the corridor, Braddock." He paused. "He told me you caught a 3-word radio transmission and used it to identify a second operative who was sitting in the same room as federal agents." That last part was a guess that turned out to be right. "Reeves says you say that about everything you did tonight." Most of it was a guess that turned out to be right. He looked at her with the kind of directness that came from someone who had spent 11 months operating in conditions that required accurate reading of people and had gotten very good at it. What's the part that isn't? She thought about it, genuinely. The medication flag, she said. That wasn't a guess, that was just correct. The dosage was wrong. I filed it because it was wrong. Everything else I did tonight was built on top of knowing how to do this job. She gestured vaguely at the room, meaning the hospital, the floor, the work. This job, specifically. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone who recognized something they'd been told in a new way. 11 months, he said. I was under for 11 months. I operated in 4 cities. I had assets in 3 facilities in this network. And the thing that was going to unravel it, the thing they were most worried about losing, was a nurse's medication flag. He let that sit. Do you understand what that means? It means the small things are where the errors live. It means you are very good at your job, he said, without ornamentation. Both of them. She looked at the window. The November sky outside was the flat, even gray of a day that had decided not to commit to anything. There were bare trees along the hospital's perimeter road and a parking lot that was beginning to fill with the ordinary morning traffic of a hospital going about its business, which struck her as simultaneously unremarkable and somewhat extraordinary. Reeves's program, she said. He told you about it. He did. What did you tell him? That I had patients. She paused. And then I went back to my patients. Harlow was quiet for a moment. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. He's good at his job, Harlow said. The program is real, and it matters, and he needs people who can do what you did last night, not just the tactical end, but the clinical piece, the reading of a building, the understanding of patient risk, the ability to function in both registers simultaneously. He shifted slightly in the bed and absorbed the discomfort of that without expression. He won't pressure you. That's not how he operates. But I'm telling you, because I was the reason this was here, and because I've seen a lot of people do difficult things, and what you did last night was specific and rare. He met her eyes. Both halves of it. She looked at him. How's the pain? He blinked. Currently, manageable. Your drain output before removal. Was it under 30 cubic centimeters in the 24-hour window? A beat. Yes. Why? Because if it wasn't, they pulled it too early, and you're going to have a fluid collection at the surgical site by tomorrow, and your transport is going to be less comfortable than it should be. She held his gaze. I'm asking because you're my patient until noon, and that's how I do this job. He looked at her for a long, specific moment. Something in his expression settled into a kind of warmth that she suspected he didn't show many people and that she filed away without comment. It was under 30, he said. I confirmed it with the surgical fellow this morning. Good. She stood. Get some sleep before transport. She was at the door when he said her name. Not Doss. Her name. Mara. She looked back. The night shift charge nurse, Sasha Oren. She stayed on for 4 hours past her shift end. She pulled the Murak employment record. She coordinated patient shelter on the 2nd floor. She kept your ER running while you were doing everything else. He paused. She didn't know your background. She just trusted your judgment. Yes, Mara said. She did. People who trust your judgment without needing to know why, that's not common. She thought about Sasha at the nursing station at midnight, typing without asking why, printing without asking why, answering the phone at 4 a.m. still and calm. She thought about Petra pulling the yellow handle. She thought about Tomas Ferreira sitting against a wall with a cut on his head and choosing not to react when she appeared in the corridor because he'd read her correctly. She thought about Warren Gill guarding a coffee mug. No, she said, it isn't. She walked out of the suite and down the corridor and into the stairwell, and she stood on the landing for a moment with her back against the wall and her eyes closed and her shoulder aching and her lip pulling at the tape, and she let herself be still for approximately 45 seconds, which was all she was going to give herself, and then she went downstairs. At 11:30 a.m., the day shift had been on for 3 hours, and the ER had the particular quality of a place that was returning to itself. New patients in the beds, the ordinary machinery of care and documentation, and the small daily emergencies that were the actual texture of the work. Mara had completed her handoff notes with a thoroughness that went 3 pages longer than standard, because the night had generated events and decisions that needed to be in the record regardless of how long the record became. Denny Polk arrived at 11:45, looked at her, looked at the surgical tape on her lip, and said, "Do I want to know?" "Probably not right now," she said. He studied her for a moment with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, something between discomfort and the beginning of a different kind of regard. He'd been on the second floor for most of the night, she gathered, sheltered with the other day shift arrivals who'd come in early and gotten caught in the lockdown. He'd heard things. His version of events was incomplete and would remain so for some time. "The medication flag," he said. "The Mendrano chart. It's resolved. I know, I saw the corrected order." He put his hands in his pockets. "I told you to just fix it." "I know." He stood there, not apologizing because Denny didn't apologize. It wasn't in his operational vocabulary. But standing there with the distinct quality of a man who was in the early stages of understanding that the reason he'd said just fix it and the reason she'd refused were separated by a gap he was only beginning to measure. "You want to get out of here?" he said. "You've been here for, what? 15 hours. Go home, Mara." She picked up her jacket from the back of the station chair, looked at the ER one more time. Petra at the far station, 2 of the day shift nurses doing their morning round, the monitors, the bay curtains, the pass-through window in Bay 3 with the coffee mug still on it because nobody had moved it and she hadn't told anyone to. She walked out through the ambulance bay doors into the November morning. The air was cold and damp and smelled like the river that ran 2 miles south of the hospital, which she'd never actually visited in 2.5 years of living in Dunlap City. The parking lot was full. A family was walking in through the main entrance with a child between them, and an elderly man was waiting at the patient pickup curb reading a newspaper, and an ambulance was pulling in at the far end with its lights off, which meant the person inside was stable. Ordinary morning, ordinary hospital. She was standing at the edge of the ambulance bay, keys in her hand, when her phone rang. Unknown number, different area code from last night's unknown number. She answered. "Ms. Doss?" A woman's voice, precise, unhurried, the voice of someone who chose their words the way other people chose investments. "My name is Dr. Sylvia Raines. I'm the director of the program Commander Reeves discussed with you." Mara stood very still. "I understand you've had a long night," Raines said. "I'm not going to take more than 2 minutes of your time. I want to ask you one question." "All right," Mara said. "The medication flag. The lisinopril discrepancy. You filed it at 4 p.m., before the evening's events, before you had any indication that the night was going to be what it was. You filed it because the dosage was wrong and a patient's safety required it, despite being told explicitly by your attending physician to chart as ordered." A brief pause. "Why?" Mara looked at the ambulance bay doors, at the ordinary November morning, at the bare trees along the perimeter road. "Because he was my patient," she said. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone processing. The silence of someone who had already known the answer and had asked the question for a different reason. "We'd like to meet with you," Raines said. "Not immediately. You need sleep. But in the next 72 hours, if you're willing, we can come to Dunlap City." Another pause. "I think you already know what we're going to say." Mara turned her keys over in her hand. The keyring had a small worn tab on it, a piece of green fabric, army green, that she'd tied there years ago and never removed for reasons she'd never examined closely. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "I haven't decided yet." "That's a fair answer," Raines said. "We'll be in touch." The call ended. She stood in the cold air for another moment, then walked to her car. She drove 3 miles to the apartment she'd lived in for 2.5 years. A second-floor unit in a building that was adequate and unremarkable and had a window facing east that she'd never made curtains for because the morning light was one of the things she'd decided to keep. She parked. She climbed the stairs. She unlocked the door. On her kitchen counter, between a stack of unread mail and a coffee maker she'd had since before the army, was a plain envelope she'd found in her locker 3 days ago and set down without opening. No return address. Her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. She'd forgotten about it. She stood in her kitchen in her scrubs with the November light coming through the east window, and she picked up the envelope. The postmark was 17 days ago. The stamp was domestic. She turned it over. Nothing on the back except the seal, already partially loose at one corner, as though it had been opened and resealed. She pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. 8 words. No signature. "We know what you did in Fowler Basin." She read the 8 words 3 times. Not because she needed to read them 3 times to understand them. She understood them on the first pass with the specific physical clarity of someone who has spent years not thinking about a particular place and has just had it named without warning. She read them 3 times because her body needed the repetition to process the distance between where she was standing, her kitchen, November light, cold coffee maker, 2.5 years of quiet, and the place those words pointed to, Fowler Basin. She set the paper on the counter, stepped back from it, looked at it from 2 feet away as though distance would change what it said. It didn't. She picked up her phone and called Reeves. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was still awake, which meant he was either still at the hospital or had gone somewhere and not slept, which in either case was a choice she understood. "I need you to come to my apartment," she said. A pause. "Now?" "When you can. Bring someone from your team if you need a witness." She looked at the paper on the counter. "I found something." "Are you safe?" "Yes. This isn't immediate, but I need someone to see it." "Address?" She gave it. He said 30 minutes. She hung up and stood in her kitchen and did not sleep and did not sit down and did not look away from the paper for very long, because looking away from it felt like a concession she wasn't prepared to make yet. Fowler Basin was the name of a place that did not exist in any public record. It was the operational designation for a valley in a part of the world she'd been in during the last 18 months of her service. The 18 months that produced the vague paperwork and the medical discharge and the things she didn't say the name of out loud. Something had happened there. She had been there when it happened. The people who knew about it could be counted, as far as she understood, on both hands with fingers left over. 8 words on a sheet of paper in an envelope with her name on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. Someone had opened this envelope before her. Someone had resealed it. She spent the 30 minutes thinking about who. Reeves arrived with Petty Officer Vaux, which she appreciated. Vaux had been in the recovery suite, had been in the parking structure, and had the kind of operational discretion that came from someone who understood that what you saw in the field stayed exactly as described, and no more. She let them in. She pointed at the paper on the counter. Reeves read it. His expression didn't change, which told her he was managing it rather than feeling nothing. "Fowler Basin," he said. "You know it." "I know the designation." He set the paper down. "It was in your service record, the vague section." "Who has access to that record?" "With sufficient clearance, several agencies, depending on which classification tier the file sits in." He looked at her directly. "I have access. My commanding officer has access. The program director, Dr. Raines, has access because she vets every candidate." He paused. "And anyone who hacked their way in." "The envelope was opened before I received it, resealed." He looked at the envelope, at the partial looseness of the seal she'd noticed the night before, and filed away because she'd been too tired to deal with it. "When did you find this?" 3 days ago, in my locker. Your locker at the hospital." "Yes." He looked at Vaux. Something passed between them that she read as the specific communication of people who had worked together long enough to shorthand it. Vaux took out his phone. "Who had access to your locker?" Reeves said. "Any hospital staff with a master key, facilities management, building security." She stopped. "Thomas Ferris." Ferris, the facilities director who had been picked up at 3 a.m. at his home, who had been placed in the hospital before the operation was built, who had been in this building for 3 years and had access, she now understood, to everything that Merrick's architecture required him to have access to, including, apparently, the staff locker room. He opened it before putting it in my locker, she said. He wanted to know what was in it before I did. Or he put it there himself on behalf of whoever sent it. She considered this. Why would someone in the network send me a message about Fowler Basin? They don't gain anything by threatening me. I'm a nurse. I wasn't a threat to the operation until last night. You were a potential threat, Reeves said. Someone identified you the same way we did. Former service, dual background, placed in a hospital that was a network node. They wanted to understand what you knew and what leverage they had over you if you became a problem. He paused. The message isn't a threat, it's a test. They were checking whether you'd react, whether you'd run, whether you had something to protect. She looked at the paper, at 8 words that someone had sent to determine how afraid she was. The answer, she decided, was not very. Who sent it? She said. We'll find out. He took the paper and the envelope with gloved hands. Vos had produced gloves from somewhere with the quiet efficiency that was becoming characteristic of him in her experience, and bagged them. This is evidence in the federal case. The network's reach extended further than Merrick and Ferris. Someone above their operational tier knew about you. That person is still unidentified. He met her eyes, which means the case isn't as closed as Okonkwo presented it this morning. It's never as closed as it's presented at 8 a.m., she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. She looked at her kitchen, at the east window with its November light, at the coffee maker she'd had for 8 years and the stack of unread mail and the 2.5 years of quiet that this apartment represented, and she thought about how quiet had been the thing she'd needed when she'd arrived and about whether it was still the thing she needed now. I'm going to sleep, she said. 4 hours. Then I want a meeting with Okonkwo and whoever in the FBI is running the network investigation. Not as a witness, as someone who has relevant information about a classified operational designation that just appeared in a federal evidence bag. She looked at Reeves. Can you arrange that? He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd first seen in the recovery suite, the one that was recalibration, reassessment, a man updating his estimate of a situation in real time. Yes, he said. Good. She pointed at the door. 4 hours. He almost smiled. Get some sleep, Doss. They left. She locked the door, set her phone alarm, lay down on her bed fully clothed, and was asleep in under 3 minutes. She slept 4 hours and 12 minutes, which was 12 more than she'd intended, and woke up with her shoulders stiff and her lips sore and her mind already running through the sequence of what needed to happen and in what order, which was how she'd always woken up in the field and which she'd spent 2.5 years trying to replace with something more ordinary and had apparently not succeeded. She showered. She ate something, eggs methodically standing at the counter because sitting down felt like a commitment to rest she wasn't ready to make. She changed into clothes that were not scrubs, which felt like the smallest possible declaration of something. At 3 p.m., she was in a federal building in Dunlap City that she hadn't known existed until Reeves had texted her the address. A nondescript 3-story structure 2 blocks from the courthouse that housed, apparently, a regional FBI field office and whatever space the U.S. Attorney's Office needed when they were working a case in the county. The conference room she was brought to had better coffee than the hospital, and the same institutional overhead lighting, and Vera Okonkwo at the head of the table with 2 FBI agents she hadn't met, and a man from a federal agency whose specific designation Okonkwo introduced with a title that was technically informative and practically opaque. Reeves was there. Raines was on a screen at the end of the table. Video call, clear image, the same unhurried voice from the phone this morning, and a face that was composed and attentive, and older than Mara had expected, late 50s, the kind of face that had been places and retained the geography of them. Mara put what she knew on the table. Not everything. The thing about Fowler Basin she held back, not because she was protecting herself, but because she'd decided that Fowler Basin was a separate conversation for a different room, and what this room needed was the operational information about the network, about Ferris, about the envelope, and about what she'd observed in this hospital over 25 months that might be relevant to a supply chain investigation with a scope that extended across 4 states. She talked for 40 minutes. She answered questions for another hour. She was precise about what she'd observed directly and honest about what was inference, and she flagged the distinction every time, which Okonkwo noticed and noted. At the end, Okonkwo said, "The individual above Merrick's tier, The person who sent or authorized the message about Fowler Basin. We have a working identification. Mara waited. A man named Roland Speer. He runs a logistics consulting firm with offices in 3 cities. On paper, clean. His firm has contracts with 6 hospital systems in 2 states, providing supply chain management advisory services. Okonkwo said it without emphasis, which was its own kind of emphasis. He was the architect above Merrick. She reported to him. Ferris reported to him. Braddock was contracted through one of his subsidiary entities. She paused. Harlow's investigation identified him 8 weeks ago. We have been building the evidentiary case since then. Tonight's operation, Mara said, last night, was partly about Speer understanding that his network inside Harlow General was exposed. Harlow's cover may have been compromised 2 weeks ago through Braddock. Speer sent the team to retrieve the information before the federal case was strong enough to move on him. Okonkwo looked at her steadily. Last night failed for him. His team is in custody. His primary hospital node is burned. His inside personnel, Merrick, Oakes, Ferris, Braddock, are cooperating or in the process of cooperating. She placed both hands flat on the table. This morning at 9 a.m., federal agents executed search warrants on Speer's primary office and his residence. He is currently in federal custody. The room was quiet. He sent the Fowler Basin message, Mara said, or authorized it. We believe so. His phone records include a contact with a number we've linked to Ferris 2 weeks ago. The timing aligns with when the envelope would have been prepared. Okonkwo paused. What it tells is that someone in Speer's network ran a check on you when you showed up in a hospital they were using and found something in a military record they shouldn't have had access to. She looked at Mara with the direct, measured regard of someone who had handled many things carefully and was handling this one carefully too. That's a separate investigation, the unauthorized access to your service record. I want you to understand that it's being taken seriously. Mara looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, which was the same laminate that conference room tables everywhere were made of. At her own hands, the scrape on the left palm still visible, the bruising on her forearm now fully developed in the particular yellow-purple of a 2-day contusion. Oakes, she said. What happens to him? Okonkwo considered the question in the way of someone who was going to give an honest answer rather than a diplomatic one. Federal cooperation agreement is being negotiated. He'll provide full testimony about the supply chain operation. He'll face charges. The charges he faces are going to be significant. Accessory to the network operation, obstruction, falsifying hospital records to cover distribution activity. She paused. He will not practice medicine in this state again. That's separate from the federal charges, but it's certain. Merrick. Charged. Full cooperation required for any consideration. She was the infrastructure, which the prosecution will make very clear. Okonkwo's voice was even. Ferris, Braddock, the 6 men from last night's operation, all charged, all in various stages of processing. She met Mara's eyes. Speer will be the trial. His attorneys will fight. It will take time, but the evidentiary foundation Harlow spent 11 months building, combined with what was recovered last night, is substantial. How substantial? Substantial enough that his attorneys advised cooperation and he refused, which tells you something about either his confidence or his judgment. Mara looked at Reeves, who was sitting across the table with his hands folded and the particular contained patience of someone who had known most of this already and was watching her process it. What was in the pharmacy supply chain, she said. What were they moving? Opioid analogs, Okonkwo said. Fentanyl compounds, primarily, routed through legitimate pharmaceutical supply chains with falsified DEA documentation. The hospital loading docks were receiving and rerouting. Merrick managed the legal exposure. Oakes managed the pharmacy override access. Braddock managed patient record falsification when needed to justify large requisition orders. She paused. It's the kind of operation that gets people killed, not just the patients whose records were falsified. The compounds they were routing, they were going to distribution networks in 3 cities, street level. The end product kills people. The room held that. Mara had known the shape of it since Reeves had said supply chain in the parking structure. She'd known the category. Knowing the specific gravity of it was different. Fentanyl compounds through a hospital she'd worked in for 2.5 years. Through a loading dock she'd walked past twice a shift. Through a pharmacy system, she'd flagged 17 times for discrepancies that a physician had dismissed every single time. She thought about that for a long moment. The 17 flags, she said, were any of them? 3 of them identified anomalies that, in retrospect, were cover documentation for supply chain rerouting, Okonkwo said. They were filed correctly. They were dismissed by Oaks before they reached a level where they would have triggered a formal audit. She paused. If they had reached that level, the investigation would have started 14 months earlier. The room was very quiet again. Mara sat with that, with the specific weight of 17 flags and 3 of them meaning something she hadn't known they meant, and 14 months of people who might have been protected by a formal audit that a physician in a white coat had kept from happening by telling her she was just a nurse and making her feel like the problem. She wasn't going to cry about it. She wasn't going to perform emotion for a room full of federal agents, but she sat with it, genuinely, for the 30 seconds it deserved, and then she set it down the way you set down something heavy that you've carried far enough. I want to be kept informed about the case, she said. I'll cooperate fully with the deposition. I'll testify if needed, she looked at Okonkwo. Whatever you need from me. We'll need a great deal from you, Okonkwo said, and we're aware that you gave a great deal already last night. She said it without sentimentality, which made it land more precisely. Thank you, Ms. Doss. Duptet. The federal building had a parking lot, and the parking lot had a single bare tree at its edge that was losing its last leaves in the November wind, and Mara stood beside her car for a few minutes after the meeting and watched the leaves come down 1 and 2 at a time, and did not think about anything specific, which was the closest she'd gotten to rest in 20 hours. Rains called at 4:47 p.m. I watched the meeting, Rains said, from the screen, after you left. A brief pause. I want to revise what I said this morning. I said we'd be in touch in 72 hours. I'm calling in 7. I noticed, Mara said. You handled that room the way you handled the hospital last night. You gave them exactly what they needed and nothing they didn't. And you asked the right questions in the right order, and you sat with the Oaks information for the right amount of time and then moved on. Another pause. Those aren't nursing skills and they aren't military skills. They're yours, specifically. Mara looked at the bare tree, at the leaves still coming down. Dr. Rains, she said, tell me about Fowler Basin. A silence. Not surprise. More like the silence of someone who had expected this question and was deciding how to begin. What I know is that something happened there that resulted in a medical discharge and a sealed record and a nurse in a mid-sized hospital in Dunlap City who is very careful about medication flags. Rains's voice was precise and not unkind. What I know is that whatever happened, you survived it, and that you chose a profession that puts you beside people who are vulnerable, and you do that job with a seriousness that has nothing to do with the title on your badge. She paused. I'm not asking you to tell me about Fowler Basin. I'm telling you that the program I run doesn't require you to be undamaged. It requires you to be capable and honest about your limits. Another pause. Are you? Capable or honest about my limits? Both. Mara thought about the stairwell landing where she'd stood with her back against the wall for 45 seconds. About her hands shaking slightly after she'd taken Duval down in the corridor, which was normal and not a problem. About the split lip and the bruised shoulder and the terrible break room coffee at 4 a.m. and the way she'd still checked Warren Gill's pain scale and confirmed the Mendrano order before she'd let herself leave. Yes, she said. Good, Rains said. Then here's what I actually want to tell you. The program has 3 people currently. In the last 2 years, they've operated in 2 compromised field hospitals and 1 civilian facility under active threat. They've saved 11 lives that would not have been saved without medical tactical integration. They are not perfect. They make mistakes. They get hurt. They have bad nights. She paused. Last night was a bad night for you. Last night was a productive night, Mara said. Both things are true. Rains was quiet for a moment. The program is also not what it should be yet. We're missing something. Not skills. We have skills. We're missing the perspective of someone who chose the civilian side deliberately. Who knows what it means to work in a hospital and care about the patients the way you care about them, not as a cover but as the actual work. She paused. The people in my program are good at the tactical half. They're learning the clinical half. What they haven't learned is how to be a nurse, not perform being a nurse, but actually be one, the way you are one. Another pause, shorter. I think you could teach them that. The leaves came down from the bare tree. 1, then 3, then 1. I need to go back to the hospital, Mara said. Tonight? My patients. The Medrano discharges at 7. I want to confirm it went cleanly. She paused. And Warren Gill needs his sutures checked. A sound on Rain's end that might have been recognition. All right. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll answer. She hung up, got in her car, drove back to Harlow General. Sam, the Medrano discharge had gone cleanly. The corrected lisinopril dosage was documented correctly. The discharge instructions included a follow-up flag for the prescribing physician to confirm the dosage change, and the patient's daughter had been present and had asked good questions, which Mara had stood in the corridor and answered for 12 minutes before the day shift nurse had appeared with a mildly territorial look that Mara had decided to respect and left. Warren Gill's sutures were intact. He was being discharged in the morning. He told her, when she stopped by his bay, that he'd kept the coffee mug on the pass-through shelf all night because she told him to. She picked it up and put it back on the break room shelf where it belonged, because it was somebody's mug and it had been in the wrong place for too long. She found Sasha Oren in the break room at 7:30 p.m., which meant Sasha had come in for the evening shift on what should have been her day off, which was exactly the thing she would do. Go home, Mara said. I'm covering for Petra. She's doing her incident report with the FBI. Apparently they need an hour with everyone who was here last night. Petra's going to be fine. She pulled the yellow handle. I know. Sasha poured coffee. Actual coffee. Ground fresh. The good version that someone kept in the back cabinet and that Mara had been told about 3 months ago and had promptly forgotten. Sit down. Mara sat. Sasha sat across from her and looked at her with the direct regard of a woman who did not waste time. The Merrick thing, what she was doing here. Yes. And Oakes. And Ferris. Yes. Sasha wrapped both hands around her mug. I've been here 9 years. I knew something was wrong with Oakes. I couldn't have told you what. But there was always something. She stopped. Started again. He wasn't wrong about everything. He was a decent physician on some days. But the way he managed the floor, the way he made certain people. She looked at Mara. The way he made you the problem. I was an inconvenient variable, Mara said, for his purposes. That's a very clean way to describe being told you're just a nurse for 2.5 years. Mara drank the good coffee. It was significantly better than the break room standard, which was the kind of small, specific improvement that shouldn't matter and did. I knew the medication flags were right. That helped. Knowing you're right doesn't make it easier to be told you're wrong. No, Mara agreed. It doesn't. She paused. But it means you keep filing the flags anyway, because the patient doesn't care whether you're being treated fairly. The patient just needs the chart to be correct. Sasha looked at her. Something in her expression settled into the particular respect of one professional regarding another who has said something true without decorating it. The FBI agent, Dent. She wants to interview me tomorrow. Tell her everything. Don't minimize what you saw. The pattern of Oakes' dismissals, yours, mine, the nursing staff's, that's part of the prosecution's behavioral evidence. Are you going to testify? If they need me to. Sasha nodded. Then, carefully, are you going to stay? The question had 2 meanings, and they both knew it. Mara looked at the break room wall, at the shift schedule pinned to the corkboard, at the coffee maker that was old enough to have been here when Sasha arrived 9 years ago, at the small accumulated evidence of a place where people worked hard and mostly did right by the people who needed them. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I'm here tonight. Sasha accepted this with the nod of someone who understood the difference between here tonight and here forever and respected the honesty of not conflating them. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in December, Harlow General Medical Center held an internal staff meeting in the largest conference room, the one that normally hosted quarterly reviews and had a projector that worked intermittently and chairs that were slightly too close together. It was attended by the day and evening shifts of every department, the hospital's incoming interim director, 3 members of the hospital board, and 2 federal liaisons who sat at the back and said nothing. The interim director was a woman named Dr. Frances Aldis, who had been brought in from the parent health system, who had been in the building for exactly 8 days, and who spoke with the particular directness of someone who had arrived at a difficult situation and decided that the fastest way through it was to name it accurately. She named it accurately. She described what had happened in the hospital over the last 14 months, not in legal terms and not in euphemism, in plain language that the people in the room could hold and understand. She described the supply chain operation, the individuals involved, the mechanisms they'd used. She described the internal oversight that had been systematically suppressed. She described what the investigation had found. And then she said, "The person who first identified and documented the anomalies in this hospital's systems was a member of your nursing staff. Over the course of 14 months, she filed 17 concerns through appropriate clinical channels. Every one of those concerns was either dismissed or suppressed by the physician who has since been charged federally." She paused. On the night of November 14th, she identified the breach, coordinated patient safety protocols, assisted a federal operation, and prevented the compromise of a classified asset, all while completing her nursing shift. Another pause. I want to say that again clearly because I think it needs to be heard in this room. She did all of that while doing her job. The job that the person above her in this hierarchy had spent 2 years telling her wasn't enough. The room was very quiet. Mara was sitting in the 4th row. She had not been told she would be mentioned. She had not been asked to stand or speak or do anything except attend. And she had attended because Sasha had told her to, and she generally trusted Sasha's judgment. She sat in the 4th row and felt the room's attention without letting it change her posture, because she was good at that. "This hospital failed her," Aldis said, repeatedly and systematically. "That failure was partly engineered and partly institutional, and we are going to be accountable for both parts. The nursing staff of this hospital performed under extraordinary pressure, and their performance was exceptional. I want that on record, and I want it said out loud. And I want everyone in this room to understand that the oversight structures we are building going forward, the anonymous reporting system, the independent clinical review board, the pharmacy audit protocol, exist because a nurse in your ER spent 2.5 years doing exactly what those structures should have been doing, and nobody gave her the backing she deserved." Petra, sitting 2 seats from Mara, made a small sound. Mara didn't look at her. Tomas Ferreira was in the back of the room. She'd seen him when she came in. 3 sutures under his hairline, still in place, doing their job. Denny Polk was near the wall, standing because there weren't enough chairs. He'd been different since the night. Not dramatically, not in any way that could be pointed at. Just quieter when she corrected something. More likely to read the note before dismissing it. People changed by increments when they changed at all, and she wasn't going to give it more meaning than it had. After the meeting, in the corridor outside, Aldis found her. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with white hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the manner of someone who had been in medicine long enough to have stopped being impressed by titles and started being impressed by competence. "I should have asked you before saying your name in there," Aldis said. "It's all right," Mara said. "It's not, actually. I'll know better." She looked at her with a direct, unhurried regard. "I've read your file. Your clinical record here, the flags, the incident reports, the pharmacy correspondence." She paused. "I've also had a conversation with someone named Reeves. He called last week. He was very specific about your contributions on November 14th. He didn't need to do that. He didn't do it for me. He did it for the federal record." Aldis tilted her head slightly. "Are you staying?" There it was again, the question with 2 meanings. "I'm here today," Mara said. "I have a patient being discharged at 10 and a new admit from last night who needs a care plan review." She paused. "Beyond that, I'm working on it." Aldis studied her for a moment. "You know what I've learned in 30-some years in medicine? The people who say they're working on it and mean it are the most useful people in any institution because they haven't decided yet. And people who haven't decided yet are still asking questions. And the people asking questions are the only ones who catch the things everyone else has stopped looking at." She put her reading glasses on and looked at the tablet in her hand. I'll let you get to your patient." She walked away. Mara stood in the corridor of Harlow General on a Tuesday morning in December and looked at the hallway. At the ordinary institutional light, the floor she'd walked for 2.5 years. The nurse station at the end where Petra was doing morning charting with the focused seriousness of someone who had decided that competence was the response to the world, which was the correct decision. She thought about 17 flags, about 3 of them meaning something she hadn't known, about patients she'd taken care of whose safety she'd protected in the ordinary way, the daily way, the way that didn't have a dramatic story attached to it, the dosage check, the chart note, the pharmacist call at 11 p.m. She thought about all of it the way you thought about the sum of a long column of numbers, not each one, but the total. She pulled out her phone and called Rains. "I have conditions," she said when Rains answered. A pause. "Tell me." "I keep my nursing license active. I stay credentialed. Whatever the program asks of me, I remain a working nurse. Not a cover. Actually working. Actual patients." "That's the design," Rains said. "It's not a concession. It's the point. I need time to close things here properly. 60 days. "Agreed." "And Fowler Basin." She paused. "Whatever's in my sealed record, whatever Spears people accessed, I want that investigated and I want to know what they found. Not because I'm going to talk about it to anyone, because I need to know what someone else knows about it before I work in environments where it could be used against me." A silence. Longer than the others. "That's going to require a conversation I'm not equipped to have with you over the phone." "Then schedule it." "I will," Rains said. "In person. This week, if you're willing." "This week," Mara agreed. She hung up and walked to the ER. The morning was doing its ordinary things. A family in the waiting room, an ambulance pulling into the bay, the monitors cycling their rhythms, the particular smell of a place where the work was continuous and imperfect and necessary. She went to the nursing station, checked the board, picked up the first chart. New admit, 58-year-old male, chest pain. She read through the intake, noted the medication history, flagged a potential interaction between his home beta blocker and the nitroglycerin administered in triage. She wrote the flag clearly and completely, and sent it to pharmacy and to the attending. New attending. A woman who had started 3 weeks ago and who, Mara had noted, actually read the notes. She walked to the patient's bay. He was sitting up, worried in the particular way of a man who had never been seriously ill before and had arrived at a hospital with the sudden understanding that the body was not as reliable as he'd assumed. He looked at her when she came in with the expression people got when they needed someone to tell them what was happening. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, "I'm Mara. I'm your nurse this morning. I've looked at your chart and I want to talk you through what's going to happen in the next couple of hours." He nodded. She sat down in the chair beside his bed because standing over patients was efficient and sitting beside them was human, and she had made a decision some years ago about which one she was going to prioritize. She told him what he needed to know in plain language. She answered his questions. She did not rush him, and she did not talk past him, and when he asked the question that patients always eventually asked, "Is it serious?" she gave him the honest, calibrated answer that the information warranted. He said thank you in the way people said it when they meant it. She stood up and went back to the floor. This was the work. Not the night of November 14th, though that had been real and had mattered and had cost her something she was still accounting for. Not the federal case, not the deposition she'd give in February, not the program she was going to join in 60 days. The work was this: the chart, the flag, the chair pulled up beside the bed, the patient who needed someone to sit down and look at them and tell them the truth. She had been told, by people in white coats and in administrative offices and in the particular language of institutional hierarchy, that she was just a nurse. She had never believed it, not entirely, not in the place where it would have needed to be believed to do its damage. But there had been days, 17 flags worth of days, at minimum, when it had accumulated into something heavy, when the dismissal had compounded into the particular exhaustion of a person who keeps doing the right thing in a system that keeps telling them they're doing the wrong thing. What she knew now, that she had perhaps always known, but had not had confirmed in quite this way, was that the right thing? And the system's preference were not the same thing and would not always be. And that was not an argument for giving up on the system. It was an argument for staying inside it and being difficult about the parts that were wrong. She was good at that. She was, it turned out, precisely trained for it. The ER moved around her. Admissions and discharges and the small emergencies that were the actual texture of the day, the kind that didn't make federal cases but made the difference between a patient going home well or going home worried. She moved through it the way she always had, quietly, thoroughly, with the particular kind of attention that came from someone who had learned in very different contexts that the small things were where the errors lived and the safety was. At noon, Reeves texted her. Spears' attorneys filed a motion this morning. Denied. Trial date set for March. She read it standing at the nurse station and put her phone back in her pocket and checked the medication board and found a dosage that needed clarification and called pharmacy. This was the part nobody saw. This was what 2.5 years had looked like, and what the next 60 days would look like, and what the rest of her career would look like regardless of which building she was standing in. The daily, unglamorous, essential work of a person who paid attention and refused to stop paying attention even when the people above her would have preferred she look somewhere else. She'd been called just a nurse, as though the word was a ceiling. It wasn't a ceiling, it was a foundation, and she had built a great deal on top of it, and she was not finished building.